Madame le Connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Présente.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Brélade.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de la Trinité.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Martin.
Présente.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Clément. Monsieur le Connétable de Grouville.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Ouen.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Sainte-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Southern. Madame le Deputy Labby.
Présente.
Monsieur le Deputy Tadier.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Luce. Madame le Deputy Doublé.
Présente.
Monsieur le Deputy Morel.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Lehegara. Monsieur le Deputy Ayer.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Ward.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Alves.
Présente.
Madame le Deputy Gardner.
Présente.
Monsieur le Deputy Gorse.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Farnham. Madame le Deputy Moore. Monsieur le Deputy Mezek. Monsieur le Deputy Joseph. Monsieur le Deputy Balash.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Coles.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Porray. Monsieur le Deputy Wall. Madame le Deputy Miles.
Présente.
Madame le Deputy Scott.
Présente.
Monsieur le Deputy Renouf. Madame le Deputy Curtis. Madame le Deputy Feltham.
Présente.
Madame le Deputy Binet.
Présente.
Madame le Deputy Jeune.
Présente.
Madame le Deputy Miller.
Présente.
Madame le Deputy Howell.
Présente.
Monsieur le Deputy Binet. Monsieur le Deputy Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Kovac.
Présente.
Monsieur le Deputy Curtis. Madame le Deputy Ward.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Wilson.
Présente.
Madame le Deputy Stevenson.
Présente.
Monsieur le Deputy Andrews.
Monsieur le Doyen.
Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait les cieux et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi les gouvernements et les puissances de la terre pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, de la conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit, que toute l'heure de réparation est accompagnée de ta bénédiction. Réussisse au bien et au soulagement du peuple, que de plus de commettre à leurs soins. Car nous t'en prions au nom et par les mérites de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous envoie point en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal, car à toi est la reine, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Clément.
The Connétable is absent for this morning, and he'll be here this afternoon. He's attending a medical appointment.
I think he's absent for a medical reason this morning. Members Millard. Well, someone's got to take the oath, haven't they? Okay. Are members content to mark him excusé? Excusé.
Monsieur le Deputy Southern.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Luce.
Sir, Deputy Luce is attending Buckingham Palace in his role as launching authority for St Catherine's lifeboat, so I wonder if he might be excused.
Members content to mark excusé.
So can we just clarify, is it state's business?
Well, I said excusé. I'm not sure it is state's business.
No, sir. He's attending in his capacity as launching authority with the St Catherine's lifeboat.
Yes, I think excuse is the right marking in those circumstances. Members are content to mark him excuse. Yes.
Madam Deputy Lehegara.
Deputy Lehega remains on State's business at the same conference as yesterday. Thank you, sir.
State's business.
Monsieur le Deputy Farnham.
Présent.
Madam Deputy Moore.
Present.
Monsieur le Deputy Mezek.
Deputy Mezek remains on the same conference as yesterday. Thank you, sir. On State's business. Thank you, sir.
Business, thank you.
Monsieur le Deputy Ozef.
Présent.
Les états sont constitués. We now return to the debate. I assume the members whose lights are on wish to speak in the debate. Is that right? Yes. In that case, I have Thompson Hellier, then Deputy Gardner, Deputy Catherine Curtis, Tom St Martin. Deputy Scott, I had you down next in any event to speak.
Okay.
Do you want to speak next? And then Deputy Ward. Yes. Deputy Scott.
Sir, before I speak, was the Solicitor General to speak, to come back on questions?
Is there anything else you wish to add to the answers you gave yesterday?
Sir, no, I don't think so. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Scott.
Sir, I would like to thank the many islanders who have shared hopes, experiences, fears and hypotheses with me in advance of this debate. I apologise, I have not managed to reply to everyone and intend to cover many concerns raised in this speech. We have a caring community. Advocates on both sides of this debate say they wish to prevent abuse and suffering. Unfortunately, as States members, we cannot prevent all abuse and suffering. But we can think about the numbers of people whom we can support in ensuring their death and or unbearable suffering is not prolonged by the force of law. And we can weigh this against the risk that a decision to die could be the result of coercion or the feeling of being a burden. We don't seek to prevent child abuse by preventing people from having children. We don't seek to prevent domestic abuse by preventing domestic relationships. We can only aspire to minimise abuse and suffering in partnership with clinicians, the police, educators and social workers. I thank Deputy Barbara Ward for volunteering a comment on my question of the Solicitor General yesterday. I note her comment on the Nurses' Code of Conduct. Just like laws, codes of conduct sometimes need to be changed to improve definitions, address flaws, and reflect changes in attitudes in society. The commandment, thou shalt not kill, does not mention self-defence. We nevertheless have self-defence as a defence to murder. There is no legal duty to avoid death unless seeking death creates a danger to others. History has many examples of people deliberately allowing others to kill them. Some may call that suicide. Others may call that martyrdom. Pain can be progressive and subjective. It can spike randomly. Despite the attention of caring nurses, I've witnessed a number of family members in pain and discomfort while dosed up on morphine so that they are barely conscious at the end of their lives, such as my brother, skeletal from terminal cancer, and too drugged up to have a conversation, but still saying ouch when nurses moved him. A family member in her 90s in a drug-induced coma kept trying to remove her catheter. Another, near the end of his life, and suffering from Parkinson's disease and a stroke, tore the feeding tube from his throat. The nil by mouth sign put above his hospital bed by his professional carers to prevent him from doing it again. I do not support forced martyrdom. The soldier who is dying from severe injuries on the battle and asks his comrade to kill him is seeking mercy. just like my 90-year-old grandmother, who pleaded with my aunt to help kill her rather than being forced to continue with the deprivations of her advanced cancer away from her own home and amongst strangers. We all want those close to death or who are suffering to be cared for and comforted. But it's not always possible to give that care and comfort every minute of a person's life, whether you are a professional carer or a family member. Being beside a loved one at the time of death can be an unfortunate lottery. Forcing people to die in the care of and company of strangers at the time of death, or to witness another's forced suffering, can also be said to be a form of abuse. Some have hypothesised about coercion. Coercion means doing something against your free will, often under the threat of violence. Most people in their lives acquire loved ones and are loved and supported by them, and those loved ones seek to protect them. On top of the safeguards on which government officers have worked so sensitively and diligently, the person seeking assisting dying under these proposals has to self-administer the substance that kills them. If that person is not acting out of free will, they would hesitate. They will not be forced to self-administer that drug. An argument has been raised that people should be protected from not wishing to be a burden on their families, notwithstanding the need to be assessed for unbearable suffering, even to be anywhere near assisted dying. The older we are, the more we experience the trauma and suffering of what might be described as uncomfortable deaths of loved ones involving prolonged suffering. The more we may wish to spare our own loved ones of the same. Deprived of the means of choosing the time of our deaths can be overly demanding on both ourselves and our families. Why deprive people of full mental capacity who are suffering unbearably this final act of autonomy, of love, and even self-love? My father chose to sign up to fight in a world war at the age of 17. Why did he do that? To spare others from suffering. Who tried to stop him from exercising his freedom of choice in the matter? In my experience, elderly loved ones can feel pressurised to go on living because of family, rather than the other way round. They are wiser, more stoic, more pragmatic about death than many. Only 2 weeks ago, we celebrated the freedom of choice. It's the beating heart of democracy. A man known as Diodotus had the task of addressing the Athenian assembly in ancient Greece after it decided to support the infliction of widespread suffering of the Mycenaeans who had sought their autonomy. He said the good citizen ought to triumph not by frightening his opponents, but by beating them fairly in argument. So many of the arguments against this proposition are founded in imagined rather than actual events. One hypothesis raised by objectors is a concern that government will invest less in palliative care. Each side has produced different data in support of that. If assisted dying is allowed, the demand on palliative care services could reduce rather than be withdrawn. It could allow improved palliative care. Our own and excellent Jersey Hospice provides palliative care as a charity independent from government with the support of this community, many of whom have appreciated the care and comforts its nurses were able to give loved ones and their families close to death. I have donated to Jersey Hospice and will continue to do so, but I still support assisted dying. As for the slippery slope, allowing abortion did not lead to widespread infanticide. The conditions in which that can occur remain restricted and safeguarded and carefully considered. Sir, the psychotherapist Viktor Frankl found that the quality of life is determined by the meaning one gives it. How do you create new meaning for someone whose life no longer has the meaning they choose for it, when all their energy is focused on managing unbearable pain, and even then, they are not succeeding? You can try. You may not succeed. In fact, pain often is more manageable, knowing that it will be temporary and can be brought to an end. For those who choose not to go through assisted dying, having applied for it, the permission it gives can itself be a comfort. In our native language, Cherie, death, there's a phrase for death that's described or that translates as packing up one's sails. That point when one no longer can sail freely. There's no mention in that phrase of motorboats or life support machines, just an acceptance there comes a time to stop sailing. There are those who understandably seek a smooth passage. This may be possible through palliative care, it may not. But the journey towards assisted dying will not be completed with this vote. The legislation has yet to be drafted. It has yet to be reviewed. In the meantime, more islanders will suffer unbearably from terminal illnesses and incurable illnesses, causing distress to loved ones and to themselves. By approving all parts of this proposition, we can make the journey towards death less fearful and more tolerable for many. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Conor Thomas and Helier.
Thank you, sir. It's been said that this is not a debate about persuasion. Members will know that we debate many things where members have set views and are unlikely to change them in the course of a debate, and that makes one think, well, why am I going to speak? I may be wrong about that. It may be that there are some members here who are undecided. But I felt I should speak because, as a senior member and with the one with the largest mandate, if I could just slip that in, I feel I should explain to my constituents why I'm voting the same way I did last time this debate took place. I've received, as other members have, hundreds of emails, well, certainly 100 emails, and I haven't replied to them all. I will try to do so. And I have been moved by many of them, particularly the emails urging me to change my position and to support assisted dying. And I'm not going to repeat or try and come up with stories, as other members have, of people who have died painful deaths. I have to say, though, I've had far more emails from people who don't want this legislation to go forward. Maybe that's because they know that I voted against last time, and so they want to check that I'm still on course. So I have a good relationship with the Health Minister. Certainly when he was Infrastructure Minister, we used to meet from time to time for a beer, and I hope that will continue after this debate. However, I must say that I'm disappointed that he has pursued this legislation and his department has pursued it with such vigour. It is, after all, a matter of priorities. We all know that our health service in Jersey is under enormous pressure. Only today, in the Jersey Evening Post, there is a devastating critique of the state of our health service. And so, because politics is a matter of priorities, I have to ask, why are we spending so much of our resources on pushing through this legislation? Is it more important than the other aspects of healthcare which have been neglected and which are in disarray? And that's no fault of the professionals who are attempting to deliver them. I've been disappointed that so much resources have gone into the preparation for this debate. I'm interested to know how much time has been spent, senior officer time has been spent in preparing us and preparing the public for this matter. And if, as I suspect it will be, it's approved, because it was approved by 40 votes to 10 last time, if it's approved, how much more is going to be spent in terms of resources on preparing the legislation and answering all those difficult questions, many of which were suggested in the Minister's opening speech? How much more resources are we spent in that area? And then, assuming the legislation is approved by this Assembly, what resources then will be required to provide this service of assisted dying on top of all the other things that we need to be doing in healthcare? Now, I'm an enormous fan of the Minister in terms of his ability to, at last, get the hospital on track. I was up at the crematorium yesterday for a service, and I was pleased to see it's all happening. And well done to the Minister for that. But I do wish that more time was being spent on getting our health service in a fit state. Now, we're told that 61% of Islanders support this. Well, I have to say that's not an enormous percentage in favour. There have been far greater proportions of Islanders who want something done than that. And as I say, I've had so many people contact me who are really concerned about the effect on our health service, asking questions, what is the rush? Why don't we get our health service in good working order before we decide we're going to offer this additional service? I am concerned about the risk here. I think even one failure is unacceptable. And I wonder if the proponents of this law are so convinced that not one person will suffer a wrongful death if assisted dying legislation is available. Don't minimise coercion. Now, the last speaker was suggesting that it's not a problem. I do have experience of how awful families behave when someone dies in terms of legacies and wills and houses. And I've seen that happen several times, and it is quite shocking. And I'm concerned that if someone is fully compos mentis but nearing death, there will be pressure put on them. They will feel pressure that they should exit this world to help their family. I'm really concerned about that. And I think it might only happen once, but once is too often in terms of the preciousness of human life. So I'm not convinced. I don't think this is a priority. I don't think it should be a priority for our health minister or for our health services. We have a fantastic hospice who manage the process of dying really well. We've all had experience of people up at hospice who have had their final journey eased and supported by the professional care, which astonishingly is paid for out of donations. It's not even funded by the government. And yet here we are thinking about funding a route out of this life. I think it's wrong, sir. I think the priorities are wrong. I think we should vote against this. We should get our house in order in terms of our health services and then come back, if we need to, in due course. We won't be the first. Do we need to be the first jurisdiction to get this through? I don't believe we do. It's not a race. Let's get our own house in order as a deliverer of health services and then come back to the matter if we need to later. So my position hasn't changed, so I won't be supporting any parts of this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conor Tarb. Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. This is arguably the most emotive and complex subject that we can debate as states members. It's quite literally a life and death debate. As everyone, I have received numerous emails and well-informed, well-reasoned from islanders, professionals and campaigners from both sides of the argument. And I'm grateful for them and apologize in advance if I didn't answer to all of them. I've done my best. I'm also grateful to the officers who have been supportive from the first engagement to being even here yesterday after the state sitting, later speaking to me and clarifying and working through my concerns, and I'm grateful for them as well. Even this morning, whilst rewriting my speech, I have considered new information which was brought to my attention, and I'm sure there is more we will learn today during this debate, listening carefully to each other. Reflecting on yesterday's debate, I am so grateful for members who spoke, and I was thinking about Deputy Ferry's speech when he shared his experience and his knowledge from the headways, which is one part of the argument. And Conatable of St. John, very emotive speech and very touching speech about the person who is suffering from motor neuron disease, MND I will use. So where I am, I'm sure that as most of us, we have various values within us, something that guiding us through this life. And this debate actually challenging our values, that they are not meeting really with each other. It is my general rule in life that government should express no opinion or not have any jurisdiction over what happens in people's private lives. If it is a will of some islanders to be able to die this way, I do not consider it to be my place to deny it. The ability of a person of sound mind to decide what they want to do with their own body is one of the fundamental rights, I think, as a human being. It's freedom to your life, your own way, includes freedom to die your own way. Palliative care, unfortunately, does not eliminate requests for the assisted dying, nor does request for assisted dying indicate a failure in palliative care. Saying this, I also believe that palliative care work is extremely important and must be enhanced, because the modern medicine was greatly extended when we are lucky at the end of the life process. I'm really grateful for the scrutiny report, and I would like to congratulate Deputy Duble, Deputy Balash, and Deputy Curtis, because their scrutiny report actually raised very valid questions and recommendations, which I hope will be taken seriously, even though that I would like to have some information today which probably would make my choice easier, but I'm sure that I hope it will be delivered. One of the recommendations, it's about our ability, and this is where I'm feeling connected to what the Constable of St. Helier just said, how we deliver our palliative care. Do we have a gold standard of the palliative care? We do have a strategy with long-term objectives, but it's not clear what are the plans. And I would like to hear commitment from the Health Minister to invest into the implementation of the current palliative and end-of-life care strategy. It hasn't been mentioned during the opening speech, but the opening speech was very, very helpful and good, actually proposing, but where is the palliative care standing? In my opinion, if I'm speaking about the palliative care, it requires that hospice services should be fully funded, from my perspective, by the government, and not rely on volunteers as excellent as they have been in raising funds. I would also like to ask, do we have commitment for other areas for the delivery? Would the minister find funds to deliver dementia strategy, women health strategy, suicide prevention training, neurodiversity strategy, updating mental health and other areas within HCS which are urgently required? I'm happy to take word strategy out, but all services that I mentioned, and I think this is what Constable of St. Helier raised, are extremely important now. It's early intervention and prevention investment is coming first for me before we're providing extra service. It's not either or, and I believe we've been almost 3 years before the previous debate, and it will take time to go to the legislation. What I'm raising, and it will be something that we will question, I would personally question when if this will be adopted legislation will come back for the debate, that these things that I mentioned in my speech will be in place and it will be good standard. Back to the assisted dying. My focus and concerns are around safeguards, which should be clear and protective. And I looked at I've read, Switzerland has seen a decrease in do-it-yourself end-of-life attempts since it introduced assisted dying 35 plus years ago. From the statistics that I have seen, I couldn't find any evidence that assisted dying has been normalized and adopted as a routine end-of-life care. It's Switzerland, which has the most, I think, liberal progressive assisted dying practice, has been in place for 35 years. It accounts for around 1.8% of all deaths. And speech of Deputy Scott almost brought me to tears when she mentioned the situations when people need to take the decision and to suffer. And this is where the values are lying. Where I'm struggling, I do struggle with unbearable suffering, and I explain why. Paragraph 39 in the proposition contains specific examples that made me frozen for personal reasons. Where a person has a life-changing injuries because of the motor vehicle's accident, those injuries cause unbearable suffering but do not necessarily shorten their life. The paragraph 258 gives wider explanation. 5 years ago, a person was involved in a serious motor vehicle accident. As a result, they suffer life-changing injuries, including paralysis from the neck down and chronic pain. The person requires 24-hour care support. The person has unbearable suffering caused by chronic pain, inability to carry out basic day-to-day tasks, difficulty speaking, loss of body functions, and inability to feed themselves. But their death is not reasonably anticipated. This person will be eligible for Route 2. They have a medical condition and they're mentally suffering. And this is where dilemma for me arises. Life-changing injuries from a car crash is a really wide category, and the paragraphs 44 and 45 saying the assessment process acknowledges that the tolerability of suffering is subjective and can fluctuate. And this is in the proposition. Different people experiencing suffering in different ways, and it is only person affected who can determine if they can bear suffering. Again, this is words from the proposition. For me, it feels like a very wide, largely undefined category, which is both objective, subjective, and fluctuating. I'm not sure if Route 2 will be voted down or it will pass today, and this is what I'm asking again, Minister, and I would be welcome to correct by other speakers. If the Route 2 will not be passed today, and for example, Route 1 would go forward, would the Minister can bring back, when he is bringing the legislation, and include additional defined condition for the people with incurable diseases, which will meet the condition described in the paragraph 258. For example, people who been really life-changing and cannot do anything after the car crash, or people from the motor neuron disease. So would it be possible? We received this morning an email which brought to our attention that people with MND can access assisted dying. Annual report shows that 10% of people who use American and Australian laws are people living with neurological disease, and majority of those people are living with MND. Victoria and Australia, whose eligibility requirements are most similar to Route 1 of our proposition, MND is the most represented disease apart from cancer in request for assisted dying. People affected by life-changing circumstances have potential to rediscover and reinvent themselves. They can find new ways of living, and this is why I would welcome further consideration how we can expand Route 1 in the final legislation for incurable diseases like MND. It's for me basic human right to have an autonomy over our body when the body is failing us. I was reassured by the Minister that there is no power to change by order or any regulations, and it will be very clear what we debated, if any change will come back to the Assembly in 18 months. I do believe it is the quality of life which is most important. Also, the loss of dignity which comes suffering have to bear, and then prospect of unnatural long death process. I will continue to listen to the debate and to the Minister's closing speech to take my final decision for the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. There are issues of principle here. The traditional sanctity of life as expressed by the Church versus modern autonomy, the right to control one's own life and destiny up to and including death. So allowing for assisted dying is not an easy decision to make. And to make an informed decision, we must look to research and experience. I have worked in a nursing home, helping to care for dying people. And this experience, combined with all the information gathered during the last few years, including working with fellow deputies on the Assisted Dying Review Panel, has helped to refine my thoughts. Also, like other deputies, I've received many emails, and I thank everyone who's contacted me about this matter, both at my constituency meetings and with emails. I've tried to reply to them all, so if I've missed anyone who might be listening, please accept my apologies. I made an analysis of those emails because each one is written with heartfelt beliefs. And certainly this month, there have been roughly half for assisted dying and half against. On analysis of each email, I found that those who had lost a family member, which they described in the email, were 4 times, that's 400%, as likely to want assisted dying. So that helped me come to a decision. I value experience over belief. So I'm pretty sure I'll vote for Route 1. We've heard from many people whose family member died a painful and undignified death. And although palliative care can be wonderful in Jersey, it cannot guarantee the dignified, pain-free death that terminally ill patients hope for. The reality is assisted dying for terminally ill people is already available to those who have financial means. The Dignitas Clinic in Zurich offers assisted dying to non-Swiss residents at a cost of between £7,000 going up to £15,000. So only those with these financial means have access to this choice. In the interest of fairness, shouldn't our own terminally ill people have the option to die peacefully at home? For these reasons, it seems sensible to vote for Route 1. As for Route 2, I have some concerns. I will listen to the debate and won't finally make my mind up till the time comes to vote. My main concern is around the subjective nature of suffering combined with coercion. Unfortunately, modern society is still riven with ageism and anti-disability prejudice. Many fine words are spoken, but in practice, as many older people and people with disabilities will know, when it comes to issues that concern them, around equality of access, for example, those fine words mean nothing. Proof of this failure of culture can be seen, for example, in a recent major newspaper opinion piece. The Times columnist Matthew Paris argued that assisted dying could help address the cost of an ageing population. In my opinion, that's disgraceful and should never have been published. But that article was widely condemned, but the editors still thought it was okay to include it in their newspaper. Another example was that during the height of the pandemic in the UK, some people with learning disabilities were given do not resuscitate orders without their consent. These examples demonstrate that there is still a culture of belief around those who deserve to live and those who are expendable. And people do not make decisions in a vacuum. We are affected by the prevailing culture and by those around us. There is an underlying bias, conscious or otherwise. For these reasons, I'm considering that while I can support Route 1, I may not be able to support Route 2, even though I believe in individual autonomy. I'm pleased that we will be making this decision today. There has been a huge amount of high-quality work done by officers, both in government and scrutiny, and we should all be well prepared to vote either pour or contre. Let's move this forward, and my thoughts now are with those who are suffering and in poor health.
Thank you, Deputy. Conatile of St Martin.
Thank you, sir, and I'm delighted to speak after such an eloquent speech by Deputy Curtis. So this is certainly one of the most historic propositions and without a doubt the most difficult proposition I have ever had to vote on. There is no easy answer to what is before us. Regardless of the way this debate goes, we should respect the maturity at which Jersey has considered this issue. But we must also remember that this is only part of a process. If we vote for this, whether Route 1 or Route 2, or both today, primary legislation and another debate will follow. Once a primary legislation is brought forward, we will still have the ability to change our minds. I'd just like to say that, as well as Deputy Catherine Curtis, there have been so many excellent speeches and very thought-provoking from members, one particular this morning from Deputy Scott. So many of us in this debate have personal experiences that have played a central role in shaping our views on this issue. I certainly have, and I spoke about this in the last debate on assisted dying. I will not repeat what I said last time, as it was a difficult and very emotional speech to make. We know that we cannot cure everyone, and we cannot alleviate unbearable suffering. But this is not about giving up on those who medicine cannot cure. This proposition is about letting those we love, choosing for themselves to go peacefully and with the soundness of mind, should they be in a position where to continue means unbearable suffering and a continued existence devoid of any quality of life. It is natural to want a good death for yourself or for your loved ones or indeed for anyone. Indeed, those who campaign for assisted dying or those who, because of unbearable suffering that even the best palliative care cannot control and have ultimately used assisted dying, have demonstrated incredible bravery and care for the well-being of others. I recently spoke to friends who were highly respected for their contribution to medicine, who've worked in healthcare for over 40 years, and I quote what one of them has said. I have thought long and hard about this subject, and having been in a position for over 40 years to witness occasions when palliative care sadly failed to provide a good death for a patient. A good death is what we all wish for, and usually death comes when it will. But for those who find themselves in a position where they will have an extremely painful and distressing last few months or weeks, then surely it is society's duty to provide compassionate support and a means to avoid such untenable pain and distress. Sir, assisted dying is, with the utmost respect to those who would or may choose it, an outcome of the last resort, where those requesting it know they will have the opportunity to leave this life with dignity and without fear, and the comfort and security of those around them. It would be good to hear how the Minister will seek to prevent and safeguard islanders from any risk of pressure. Overall, I think the key strength of this proposition is that it is not based on the systems which are already in place, in places such as Canada or the Netherlands. This proposition is restrictive, as it should be, and it seeks to respect the cases where we know assisted dying may be the most peaceful option for islanders facing terminal conditions that give rise to suffering that cannot be managed. I'm very glad to see that the findings and recommendations of the Assisted Dying Review Panel have been accepted, and I thank the panel for their valuable work. We need the assurances the panel are seeking, and I could not have considered voting for had the Minister refused these. And at this point, I'd also like to pay tribute to the sterling work of the officers who worked on this proposition so sensitively. The option of explicit personal choice is central to this proposition. A request for assisted dying must always come from the clear, expressive and considered desire of the person wanting to receive it. We need absolute assurance that this is what a person wants, that they understand what it means, and that they are making the decision about security. Making the decision and absolute security. I would like to pick up on a point raised by the Connétable of St Helier. The Connétable mentioned hospice, which I agree is wonderful in the care that they provide. My father and other family members all drew their last breath there. But hospice is primarily for those who suffer from cancer, and not everyone can be treated there. Palliative care must always be available for all. Whichever way we vote on this, we would all agree that palliative care must be invested in. The concerns expressed by those with disabilities and the elderly who are worried that this will transform them into burdens need to be heard. They need to be heard loud and clear. They deserve the utmost respect. We need a strong regime to care for anyone at risk of being forced into this, and islanders need to feel safe to report this to their GPs or carers or anyone else if they feel they are being pressured into making this decision. I would like to make it clear that if we decide against assisted dying, then this will not have been a wasted exercise. This will have been multiple successive governments recognising the severe ethical complexities embedded at the very core of assisted dying and treating it with the respect it deserves, with successive states' assemblies behaving with equal maturity. What we can be proud of is the knowledge that by our debate we are continuing to set a global example for how to democratically consider this issue. We need to continue actively bringing in the concerns of the elderly and the disabled so that any primary legislation gives us the safeguards we all expect. What we vote for today is whether to take another step towards a final decision on its legalisation. Sir, as I said at the beginning of this speech, another debate will follow when the Minister presents primary legislation on this. If the Minister wants to guarantee its passage, he must continue to provide the reassurance needed to every concern raised in this debate and in its build-up. And he must clearly set out in that following proposition how they will all be actively responded to. That is the very least that we can ask for. Sir, I have battled with this question in my conscience for over 2 years, and I've attended briefings, read around the subject, read a multitude of emails, both pro and contra. I thank the authors of the emails and apologise that it is impossible for me to reply to all of them. I've spoken to family, friends, colleagues, people of faith, and members of the medical profession. Every member of this assembly has thought deeply about this vote, and we have shown respect for each other, however we vote, and I'm proud of the compassion and maturity in this chamber. Before I close, I quote from Dignity in Dying. We want to see a safeguarded, compassionate law enacted that gives terminally ill, mentally competent adults the option to control their final days of life and offers protection to potentially vulnerable people. Sir, I believe that as a society we have progressed to a point where it is right that an individual who is terminally ill and suffering more than medicine can alleviate can decide within a limited scope the time of their death. Route 1 allows the individual who is close to death to decide when the pain they are suffering is intolerable, that they are existing rather than living, and to leave this world on their own terms with compassion and dignity. Thank you.
Thank you, Connétable. Deputy Wall.
Thank you, sir. So I rise with a degree of trepidation on a subject that, if my inbox is correct, has the potential to drive a deep schism through our society. No matter which way I vote today, there will be a number of constituents who firmly believe that my decision was the wrong one. I therefore think it's appropriate that I rise to explain how I have arrived at my decision and what I believe the next steps should be. I'd also make the observation that I was not in the Assembly that brought forward the original proposition, and so have no voting history that I need to defend. A couple of years ago, I hadn't given the issue of assisted suicide much thought. I'm fortunate to be a fit, healthy individual with zero medical issues. I've never broken anything, however, I have twisted my ankle badly playing tennis, a sport I love. I recall the frustration of being not able to play for a couple of weeks and thinking that if heaven forbid something more catastrophic happened, I'd probably want to end it all, as I perceived the quality of my life as I know it now would be so diminished that I'd want an end to the misery. Over the last year, as momentum has built towards this day, I've become much more sensitized to the nuances of assisted suicide and what a complex topic it is. I've also been struck by the callousness of some, in particular our previous Prime Minister Boris Johnson, where he said his party felt the COVID virus was nature's way of dealing with old people. When AIDS was first discovered amongst the LGBTQ+ community, there was real societal prejudice towards that community. If assisted suicide had been available at that time, would there have been such an urgency to find appropriate drugs that today mean those infected can now enjoy a quality of life that at the time never seemed possible? An example that the sanctity of life should always be given primacy. Over the last couple of weeks, I listened to and watched some of the most compelling arguments. Many of you may well have watched the actress Liz Carr and her programme Better Off Dead. The title of the programme, incidentally, came from a comment made to her along the lines of, didn't she feel she would be better off dead given her disability? And therein lies some of our prejudices as a society. The line, I don't want to be a burden, comes from that subtle coercion which I believe we have yet to deal with. Canada has been quoted extensively and was referenced in this programme. One doctor interviewed was quite relaxed about the fact that she had helped in excess of 400 individuals to end their lives. It was the matter-of-factness that sent a chill down my spine. Then there was the daughter left behind because her mum had chosen assisted suicide. The trauma that the person you thought loved you the most found suicide more compelling than her love for her own daughter will stay with me for a long time. Then again, we all, no doubt, read the interview in the JP of the trauma of dying a slow death and not being able to determine when the end should come. It's easy to pontificate about the subject when you are not the subject of the debilitating illness. As a society, we are always having to make decisions as to what is for the greater good. We set speed limits on our roads to avoid unnecessary deaths. We have to wear seatbelts to keep us safe. In these cases, we take a holistic view rather than give precedent to the individual. Here we are being asked to give an individual precedent. Are we absolutely sure that the right decision will be made every time? And I reference Constable Crowcroft here. What level of error rate will we tolerate? I understand that currently the average error rate in medicine is 5%. That's 5 individuals in 100 where a mistake has been made. What error rate would we tolerate when it comes to assisted suicide? 5 in 100? 5 in 1,000? When it came to the death penalty, we as a society determined that just one error was one too many. William Blackstone famously wrote, "The law holds that it is better that 10 guilty persons escape than that one innocent person suffers." That is one of the problems, that if a miscarriage of justice occurs, it's too late for the victim. There's no turning back of the clock. We have to tread really carefully when we deal with individuals who find themselves at their lowest ebb. As an example, when a person is first diagnosed with cancer, the risk of suicide increases tenfold. Do we as a society simply give up on them, slow the research and development of appropriate drugs, and push the assisted suicide option as a way to deal with unbearable pain? That may sound controversial, but these are really difficult calls that need to be made. It was, though, a constituency meeting that took place last Friday and a subsequent meeting on Monday that finally made up my mind as to how I will vote. It turned out to have little to do with the rights and wrongs of assisted suicide. It was much more practical than that. The constituent asked why, when there are so many other shortfalls in our existing healthcare provision, are we looking to introduce something that is going to place further financial burden on an already under-resourced service? We've already heard from the Health Minister that ultimately it's about the money. The Education Minister often makes the observation that we confuse cost with investment. If we don't invest in existing services, are we not, through providing this additional service, adding a significant cost to support the few rather than investing in the many? They went on to detail all the strategies that have been put on the back burner, but which are vital to the quality of life of many islanders. Dementia strategy, my colleague Deputy Gardner has mentioned these. Neurodiversity strategy, suicide prevention, and a new mental health improvement plan. We have no consultant geriatrician in place, someone able to offer a holistic approach, thereby managing frailty well. We simply haven't got our elderly health care right. We don't offer 24/7 palliative care. If we won't recruit and go ahead with this law, where is the incentive to improve this service? Will this law simply see the degradation of palliative care? We need to offer better choices, better palliative care, better care for older adults, better social care in our community. Too many people die of loneliness. That's the biggest problem I believe we need to solve. Let's not put the cart before the horse. So I return to the opening line of the proposition to request the Minister for Health and Social Services to bring forward primary legislation that permits assisted dying in Jersey. Given what I've heard and read, the commentary from all the people I've spoken to, on balance, I cannot and will not support bringing forward of this primary legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Balash.
So, like the Constable of St Helier and indeed Deputy Wall, I think that the Minister of Health has got his priorities wrong. He has spoken about a compassionate approach to the subject, and no one can disagree with that. It's one of the reasons why the scrutiny panel wanted to know more about the proposed enhancement of investment in palliative care. Palliative care has moved on enormously in recent years, but not everyone benefits from those advances. More nurses and carers need to be trained, and more resource needs to be put into it. The end-of-life strategy published by the department is fine, but where are the resources? Almost everyone needs palliative care at the end of the day, but not everyone needs the emergency exit of which the Constable of St John's spoke. If we are to have Route 1, about which I have grave reservations, it must not be at the expense of palliative care. The tail should not wag the dog. My reservations, sir, are partly ethical, but also centre on the nature of the process. Strangely, I can more easily accept the self-administration of a lethal concoction than I can the involvement of medics in administering the poison by injection. The latter seems to me to be difficult to reconcile with the notion of a profession dedicated to healing, as Deputy Barbara Ward indicated. For me, the significant aspect of the Route 1 proposal is not conferring a right to die, but the giving of a privilege to licensed medical people to bring the life of others to an end, or to kill people, to put it more bluntly. The privilege gives an immunity from prosecution for an action that would otherwise be homicide. Whether it is right or wrong to change the law in this way is a matter on which opinions obviously differ. But it is important to understand that we are talking about a legal privilege in that sense. It would be a license for one human being, subject to conditions, either to help another to commit suicide or to bring another person's life to an end. Whether one is for or against it, assisted dying is a cosy euphemism which obscures the reality of the debate. Because if one is conferring upon medical people a license of that kind, it is very important that the conditions or safeguards are crystal clear and not subject to interpretation, or indeed subject to subjective appraisal. Only the law will tell us whether the safeguards which have been suggested will work in practice. But I want to focus attention on Route 2 because I think there has been a failure to give the views expressed by the Ethical Review proper consideration. Indeed, I'm not sure that any consideration has been given to them. The Minister was rather dismissive of their views. He told the scrutiny panel that when he read their biographies, he could guess straight away what their views would be. My own view is that when three distinguished academics, whose ethical positions are different, manage to sink those differences into an agreed recommendation, that is entitled to very careful consideration. I'm not sure that has happened. The Council of Ministers has effectively ignored the recommendation that Route 2 is not ethically appropriate. I may have missed it, but I couldn't find anything in the Minister's report explaining why it was thought inappropriate to follow it. The experts suggested that it was not ethically appropriate because it reinforced a negative view about the value of the lives of people with disabilities. The first question on eligibility is, are you disabled in some way? Route 2 is a special avenue for disabled people. It is not a sufficient answer to the criticism that Route 2 targets disabled people to state that people with disabilities can make up their own minds about whether to end their lives. Almost everyone suffers at one stage or another during life from bouts of depression or unhappiness. But such disabled people, unlike the rest of us, would be able to contemplate killing themselves as a solution to their problems. They may be subtle, or indeed sometimes not so subtle encouragement to do so. Single people living on their own would be particularly vulnerable to such pressure. Many disabled individuals and groups have expressed concern about Route 2, and I think that those concerns should be listened to. A few months ago, I was in Waitrose supermarket when I was approached by a man whom I did not know, who asked me whether I was going to vote for assisted dying. I asked him why he thought it was a good thing. He told me, I get up in the morning, I go to work, I come back in the evening, I have something to eat, and I go to bed. I can't see the point of it all. We had a conversation where I tried to tell him about some of the wonders of nature and life and the beauty that was all around us, but he would have none of it. He was 42 years old. He was limping, so perhaps he had some physical disability, and maybe he would have been able to persuade a medic that he was suffering unbearably. I hope not, but I don't think we should take that risk. The ups and downs of life can distort people's perceptions, and once all the gateways have been passed, it may be too late to reverse. I'm not sure that a tribunal adds very much. What is it going to decide? Will it make a value judgment? And if so, how? Or is it going to do a tick box exercise to ensure that all the relevant tests have been passed? We simply don't know. Route 2, sir, is a bridge too far. It would be a huge step into the unknown. People like the sportsman of whom the Constable of St. John spoke qualify under Route 1. We would open a door to too many individuals who suffer from depression, which may be temporary, or, as Deputy Ferry explained from his own experience, can be addressed and mitigated. I think also that the Council of Ministers should have addressed more fully the issue of competence. It is true that, generally speaking, competence can and should be presumed. But a decision to take one's own life is surely different. Some mental issues are not obvious. Ministers say that we will have a special test of competence for assisted dying. But what is it? We don't know. And who will determine it? Will it be one of the two doctors who will carry out the assessments, and will they have the competence to make that decision? Doctors who volunteer to be part of the assisted dying service will, obviously, be in favour of assisted dying. How do we know that they will not take a simplistic approach that personal autonomy is what matters? The Minister's report contains at the end of the report contains a number of simple examples, but life, I fear, is not always that simple. Finally, I want to say that the outcome of this debate, or the next one, will define what kind of a society we are going to live in. I agree with the Minister of Health that I want to live in a caring and compassionate society. But a society which tells disabled people that their lives may not be as valuable as those of able-bodied people is not, in my view, a compassionate society. It would be a community which has elevated the concept of personal autonomy beyond its reasonable limits. It would be a community that does not care enough about vulnerable people.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. So this is a debate, so it's not simply a chance for us to stand up, say our opinion in a void and not respond to what's been said before. And as such, I've been making notes as we go along. And so to give some consideration to arguments that have been made yesterday and today. And I think we've heard some very good speeches. I won't embarrass anyone by singling them out, but I think States members are, doing themselves proud on both sides of the debate here today. Like other members, I would like to acknowledge the lots of lobbying that we've had on this, the lots of correctly engagement, if we call it neutrally, via emails. And I don't think sending us emails is bad at all. I know other members in the past have said they feel persecuted by lots of people getting in touch saying that they should vote one way or the other urgently. I think as States members we're used to balancing those and actually looking, sometimes sorting the emotion out from the facts and doing our own research too. So similarly, I'd like to thank everyone that's engaged with us on this issue. That is healthy democracy. And similarly, sorry if I've not responded to everyone yet, I've put a few emails out which generally have been fairly generic, but also I think respectful. So I know members of the public will appreciate we're getting a lot of emails at this time. What I want to do is talk specifically about some of the red herrings that we're getting in this debate and that we have been getting in this debate. Because essentially what we've got here is we're not here to decide the principle of assisted dying. That was decided 3 years ago by the previous assembly. I fully accept the fact that there are some members here today who are not in that assembly and they may wish to also make their voices heard. I, interestingly, also wasn't in that debate because I was dealing with a family bereavement at the time, so it was particularly poignant for me to be going through that and also listening to the debates and considering it at the time how I might have spoken, how I might have voted. So in that sense, this is also my speech on that. So I think we do need to recognise that there will need to be some in-principle comments here. But essentially, I think what it boils down to is we're here to decide today between adopting simply whether we pursue this law, and I think it would be very strange and we'd have to have compelling arguments to completely throw out all the work that's been going on internally, but also the engagement with the public. We effectively then have to decide whether we do this law properly or whether we do it partially. That's what I think. Do we do it right or do we do it partially? And I think my stance is very much we either do this properly or we don't do it at all. And we also have to remember that the objections and the concerns that are being raised, which are completely valid, can and will and should be worked out, not simply by this minister, because this isn't just about the minister, this is about the very good team that we've heard have been going around the island. And what we can all say is, whether we agree with assisted dying wholly, partly, or not at all, is that the staff and the level of commitment that they've brought to that, the level of intellect and research that they've brought to this subject, we know that they will leave no stone unturned, so that if eventually we do have full legislation in Jersey, it will be the best legislation that we can get. It will be legislation that does Jersey proud, and it will be legislation that is done from a compassionate and humane point of view, so that in the future it's subject to as few changes and as few legal challenges as possible, because we're not doing this for the first time. We're following those 8 or so countries and the other jurisdictions which are currently considering this argument as well. So what we've seen in the last 24 hours of this debate, but previously in wider society, is essentially the way I look at it. People say we cannot win this argument, so let's make the debate about something else. Let's make it about something it's not, and let's make it about something that we can win. Where's a good argument? Where's a good place to start? Disabled people. So disabled people here, unfortunately, and I'll have to say it as I find it, are being used as a political football. And they're being used as a political football by some people who, unfortunately, and this isn't blanket, there's a religious right that exists in this debate. And, of course, their religious beliefs, I think, are clouding their judgments. Very few of them write to us saying, I believe in a big man in the sky. And I say this slightly cautiously because I know we have the Dean to speak. But I also know that the Dean, hopefully, we're friendly and he's able to obviously speak freely himself. And so they're saying, basically, I know that assisted dying is wrong because it goes against my beliefs. Therefore, I need to find arguments that fit into that. Similarly, there might be people who say, I fundamentally believe that assisted dying is absolutely correct. Therefore, I'll make all the arguments fit my arguments. And I think that's what we've been seeing. So let's look at that very carefully. We say that we want to be a caring and compassionate society, but do we mean by that we want to be a caring and compassionate society only when people agree with us? That we want to be one where people do what we tell them to do and they do what we think is best for them? Because that isn't a caring and compassionate society. That's called paternalism. Other people also call it the nanny state. And I think we also hear this, I'm sure it's got to be a logical fallacy in terms of the arguments used. The argument, if only one. If only one person suffers under this law because we get it wrong, then that isn't worth doing. Look, we don't need to be looking for hypotheticals in this. There are real people out there who have been experiencing the very human experience that we will all go through and humanity has gone through for tens of thousands of years, about what it means to face death in uncertain circumstances. And those uncertain circumstances can be long and drawn out and very painful. And so it's about actually getting back to the nub of what makes us human. I'm not a philosopher, but I do have an interest in the subject matter, having an interest myself in being human. And I think it can be seen in two different ways. Humans have free will. They, of course, have a very high level of intelligence compared to other animals, and I'm not denigrating any animals in here. And I've got some very good friends who are animals. And we also have free will. So we have free will and agency. And what we're actually talking about here in this law, and this is what I find really emotive, is the fact that, especially when we come to Route 2, or let's call it what it is, because the Constable of St. John's quite rightly reminded us, as did indeed an individual who came to the St. Billard's consultation, that we shouldn't be using the dehumanising terms of Route 1 and Route 2. Let's call them what they are. Let's talk about assisted dying for people who are already facing death in the last 6 months or possibly the last 12 months of their life, or people who are in unbearable pain. This is what we're talking about. So you have somebody with, this isn't somebody who's twisted their ankle playing tennis. This isn't somebody who's got a disability that they are coping with and actually they're thriving in life. We're talking about people who may or may not have a long-term disability, but who have got to the point where they find themselves in unbearable suffering, that there's no cure for it, and it's only going to get worse effectively. And that's what we're talking about really in Route 2. And it may well be people who have no agency whatsoever because they become so debilitated that they're lying in a bed, that they can only move their body, below the neck. They have to rely on people 24 hours a day, and I've seen this, to change them, to turn them, to change the bed, to go to the toilet, to eat, and they have no dignity left. And what we're saying to them, if you oppose Route 2, as we might call it, or unbearable suffering, is that you've already lost your agency, but now we're going to take your free will away from you as well. The two things that make you human, free will and agency, we're removing them for you because we've got some notion that some disabled people somewhere might be abused, and that one person somewhere who somehow doesn't want to die but has somehow applied to die and has been through a rigorous process where people are looking out for their best interests as medical professionals, you might somehow slip through the net. But we've already got an error rate. So at the moment we have an error rate because there are people living who don't want to live anymore. They're autonomous individuals, they're intelligent individuals, and whose life is it anyway? It's their lives to decide. And if we don't pass both parts of this today, what we will be saying is that there will be error rates, because there will be people, thousands of them, tens of thousands throughout the world, but potentially tens and hundreds in Jersey, over the years until somebody actually brings this law in, because this law will come in. It's a human necessity, and I think it's an inevitability that it's brought in. We will have people who are facing the error of being told that they have to live when they don't want to, that they have to die in an uncertain situation. I'm in a slightly difficult position here because I'm definitely convinced by Route 2, so I will be voting for Route 2. I'm not sure about Route 1. The reason I'm not sure about Route 1 is that I don't see how this Assembly can embark on a road where we do this partially and not properly. The other consideration, I'm intellectually and emotionally convinced by Route 1, but what we have, it'd be very bizarre if members decided to only vote for Route 1 and not Route 2, because of course Route 1 allows somebody who's perfectly having a great life, who has absolutely no suffering and could be fully functional, like you or I are fully functional, simply that they're going to die in 5 months' time, 6 months' time. So they would be eligible to die. Whereas somebody who's got no capacity, to all intents and purposes, who's got a long and settled view of wanting to die in those circumstances, we would be saying to that person, you can't die, you've got to carry on suffering indeterminately, perhaps for 5 or 6 years. But the person who's got a great life, who just wants to go out of convenience because they want to die at 2 in the afternoon rather than 2 in the morning, which is also valid, is allowed to do that, because the wording of it is that it has to give rise to suffering or be current. So let's do this properly, is what I'm saying. And this isn't some kind of moral haggling that we can engage in. We can't say, oh, you know, I kind of like the principle of this, but I'll only vote for part 1 at the moment, because that will certainly keep some people in our society happy. At least I can go back and say, well, I didn't vote for route 2 because, you know, I don't want anybody being dispatched. The coercion argument, I think, has to be addressed here. And because coercion can work both ways. Let me find my notes about coercion, because we're on a limited time, sir. Coercion can work both ways, can't it? So what I would say is that if you have family and friends who are deeply religious and or anti-assisted dying, you're much more likely to be coerced to keep on living when you don't want to carry on living than to be forced to die when you want to keep on living, aren't you? It's entirely likely that if you're surrounded by your loved ones, and you know this extends to doctors. I've heard of people talking about being coerced by doctors, but you're probably much more likely to be coerced against an abortion or against ending your own life if your GP doesn't believe in that. He or she might direct you in other routes. So I think there are natural, and that's going to be entirely possible under this legislation. So, for me, this is about whether we're serious about acknowledging people's ability to make decisions for themselves. We also hear the argument about, well, this is it's so subjective. People suffering, I mean, how do we know that we're choosing the right people to die? The point is, what we don't choose. That's the great thing about this. Of course it must be subjective. How can it not be subjective? Because there is still that rigorous process that somebody has to go through, where you say, with a board, with people there, and you say, yes, it's up to me to decide. I'm the one who experiences the pain, and it is insufferable, and you explain that, and then the medical professionals will agree with that. And if for any reason they don't think you meet the criteria, you'll be told that you're not allowed to die. So there will be errors made in this. The error will be people who want to die, who think they meet the criteria, but are told by the medical profession that they're not allowed to die. So if anything, this proposition today doesn't go far enough. Can we seriously say, and you know, I speak with my human rights hat on, that we're going to say that disabled people don't have the same human rights that others have? Because if we're saying that certain people in Route 1, I lapse back into the legal speak, sir, if we're saying they're allowed to access assisted dying, but you're not allowed to access it because you're disabled and we think we know better for you, I think that's extremely patronising a position to be in, sir. I'm going to have to leave my speech there, but I would simply end by saying being a burden is often used as an argument, but actually if you read between the lines, what people are saying is that's not the main reason that they want to have the choice in end of life. It's the fact that they want to be dignified, I think, in all aspects of their life, and life actually includes the way you die. So having some control over the circumstances, the timing and the conditions in which you die, potentially being there with all your family at a time when you're in a good place rather than perhaps being alone and facing death on your own. These are exactly the same arguments we're using about suicide, which is a lonely thing. Let's not make death a lonely thing. Let's let people choose how they want to die.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Howell.
Thank you, sir. First, I would like to thank the Health Minister and his officers for all their hard work. To parishioners who have written to express their opinions, I have tried to respond, but if I haven't, my apologies, and thank you for getting in touch. And to the organisations and individuals to whom I have listened to come to the opinion I've reached today. I'm standing here today, sir, to defend the current laws of our island, as laid out by the Solicitor General yesterday. One which says that it is forbidden to kill anyone, and the Homicide Jersey Law of 1986, which has a specific reference to an offence of aiding and abetting another's suicide. Palliative care, which I fully support, is not killing, sir. It is a specialised medical care for people living with serious illness, such as cancer or heart failure. We all have the utmost sympathy and compassion for anyone who is seriously and possibly terminally ill. I understand that for them, the thought of being able to take control of when their life should end may bring comfort. And I fully respect those states members who say that if they were terminally ill and or in terrible pain, they might wish to end their lives. And if so, how can they deny the same right to others? I say that whilst appreciating this viewpoint, I do not believe we should be altering the law. I do not believe that there are adequate safeguards, and the safeguards are certainly not 100% foolproof. The impact of a death on friends and loved ones can take an unimaginable toll. Families may never recover from a parent, child, brother, sister or friend choosing to die earlier than they should. They may feel forevermore that their love was not enough. For me, instead of spending 1 million to set up the service and then at least 1.4 million annually, we should be improving our healthcare on this island for everyone. In particular, we should be enhancing the care of our elderly and our end-of-life and palliative care. There is much to be done. Dignity in Dying claim that the majority of islanders want this. The truth is only some 3,000 people have signed to say they are in favour, and that is from across Jersey's entire adult population. One of the problems is that this proposition does not have the full backing of our healthcare professionals. They have been informed, but they have not been properly consulted or listened to. 2 doctors have told me they would be prepared to participate, but very many more completely and vehemently oppose what is being suggested. They don't consider assisted dying should be any part of the healthcare system. It is against their vocation. Their relationships with their patients will be changed irrevocably. 84 Jersey healthcare professionals have written to the Health Minister to express their grave concerns. They do not want this to be introduced. They are seriously alarmed about the consequences of this change in the law. Local psychiatrists have written separately, together with the South West Region of Royal College of Psychiatrists and the Association of Palliative Care. All oppose the changes. We cannot afford to disenfranchise our frontline medical and healthcare staff at a time when we need them most. And we need them to be working in harmony without division. Some doctors have threatened to leave the island should this law come into force. We cannot afford to lose them. We cannot afford to jeopardise staff recruitment and retention. At the moment, our mantra is to have the best possible care for each and every one of us. Everyone is precious. At the moment, all of us can use the service of hospice. I think it's changed. And palliative care. But what will happen when an individual chooses an assisted death, but hospice staff do not want to be involved, and the hospice does not allow such deaths to take place on their premises? I'm uncomfortable about the hospital being used as a venue for assisted deaths. I would rather not have a death room in the new hospital. I believe it sends out completely the wrong message. Indeed, I am concerned about the message that making assisted suicide lawful sends to our children and young people and to those who are doing all they can to counter suicides on this island. Other jurisdictions where assisted suicide has been legalised have all seen significant rises in their overall suicide rates as well. There has been a 32% rise in Oregon. Please think of the impact of just one suicide in our community in Jersey. There is also real fear amongst disabled groups that assisted death will become normalised and that there will be an expectation or duty to sign up to an assisted suicide or euthanasia. The coercion or pressure will be subtle. I fear that in a prosperous island, there will always be tensions, especially where families have so much to gain in terms of property and inheritance. Liz Carr, famed for appearances in Silent Witness in her documentary Better Off Dead, puts it succinctly. Disabled groups are terrified at the prospect. Whatever reassurances are given, there will be never sufficient safeguards to protect the most vulnerable. Proponents say, no one will force you into this. It will always be your choice. But I can well imagine a scenario where an elderly relative is made to feel a burden and it is their duty to ask for an assisted death, citing unbearable suffering. Sir, I do not want our disabled islanders to feel terrified. I do not want our poor or our elderly to feel it is their duty to die because they are a burden. No person should have to live like that. So we're being asked to vote to change the law and to agree that an individual may have helped to end their lives in two circumstances. Let me start with route 2, unbearable suffering. I fear that unbearable suffering will be hard to define, and this route will be highly susceptible to mission creep. I'm also worried about the seniority and experience of doctors who are designated to be making these decisions. I think in the addendum it says they can just be qualified for 1 year and then they will be making these decisions. Sir, as the Deputy Balash pointed out, 3 ethicists were engaged to assess the proposals. They all advised that we should not be pursuing Route 2. I implore members to listen to their considered opinions and wisdom and vote with Deputy, who was it behind? The other deputy who said we should not ferry, who said we should vote against this route. And then there's Route 1, terminal illness. This would seem straightforward. But is it? A while ago, I met a dear friend who told me the tragic news that she had been given a month to live. I clearly remember the conversation. I was heartbroken. 15 years later, she continues to be a devoted wife, mother and grandmother. She has done untold good for so many. She dances her way through life. There have been others. Another friend, we'll call him Ted, diagnosed with a rare terminal disease, told to stop work, put his affairs in order. Some 8 months later, given the all clear. And then there's Vera, not her real name, due to die of a cancer that had spread extensively. No hope. I visited her in hospital. They were desperately sad times. She was expected to die within weeks. 12 years later, she has welcomed 2 little grandchildren into her family and has been an inspiration to many of us. She walks, talks, swims, and sings her way through life. 3 examples. 3 people who could have had their lives prematurely and unnecessarily ended within 14 days had this law been in force. I urge you also to vote against Route 1. Medics do get it wrong. We We cannot afford to make mistakes. Human life is to be treasured. Please listen to the majority of our health professionals and islanders. I looked it up. One of our duties as states members is to undertake our duties with particular regard to the most vulnerable members of our community, including the island's children and other people to whom the States of Jersey has a duty of care. The best protection for everyone, including disabled islanders, the elderly and children, is the current law, where it is unlawful to kill and it is an offence to aid or abet another person's suicide. Now is not the time to be bringing in this law. Please vote against the proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Conatable St Saviour.
Thank you, sir. I will be very brief, sir. We've heard a lot today about coercion and persuasion, but that's something that we do on a daily basis in this assembly, sir. That we have a view and we try and persuade our colleagues that our view is the correct one. That's what we do. But yesterday there was a small demonstration as we arrived at the chamber, and they were holding up large banners saying...
I'm very sorry.
Are we in court,
We
sir?
are currently in court. So in the first instance, could you please go to the coffee room and invite members to return to the chamber until we're caught? If we become in court again, I will suspend the sitting and we'll start again with the roll call. Yes. I'm sorry.
Thank you, sir. I'm not the best of speakers, sir, but I've never cleared the chamber before. Yesterday, sir, we were greeted on entry to the States Assembly that people were holding up large banners saying, "Do the right thing." And it's this right thing that we are struggling with today. Looking back in 2021, I voted against the principle of assisted dying. Doing some research, our Canadian cousins over a decade ago introduced assisted dying for people with an illness that would shorten their lives to within 6 to 8 months or thereabouts. In 2019, this was challenged in their court, and this challenge was upheld, stating that it was unconstitutional to favour one group of individuals against another. So this was expanded to include people with severe disabilities. And it's this slippery slope that I fear happening here. Once the principle is established, it would only be a matter of time before it's turned up one notch here and one notch there to include many, many people. As has been said, sir, I think we should do all we can to increase palliative care. I've nothing but the utmost respect for people who work in hospice, looking after people in their final weeks, months of life. More so with young children whose lives are only just beginning. I've nothing but respect for them. And as I say, we should do all we can to increase palliative care. But for reasons I've explained, that it would start us on a slippery slope. And I know I'm going to upset probably half of my parishioners. I will be voting against this proposition in all parts and urge members to do likewise. Thank you, sir.
Sir, can I ask a point of clarification from the Solicitor General relevant to that speech?
You can answer a question of the Solicitor General if you wish to.
Could I ask for advice regarding the situation in Canada and its relevance to Jersey, and in particular whether that slippery slope argument could apply here, my understanding being that the courts have supremacy in Canada or have abilities in Canada that they do not have here, and I think it might be helpful to hear what the legal position is clarified in terms of the potential for, if Route 1 were adopted, for Route 2 to happen or for any other slippage in the legislation to happen without this Assembly's say-so.
Do you want to respond to that now or a bit later on?
I'm happy to deal with it now, if that's convenient. I'm not a Canadian constitutional lawyer, so last thing I want to do is do violence to the Canadian Constitution. My understanding, my layman's understanding, is that they have a written constitution and their courts are able to declare that aspects of legislation are unconstitutional, which I understand may lead federal lawmakers there to consider their duty bound to legislate to make good the deficit. I can speak, however, as a lawyer to the Jersey constitutional position. We, of course, don't have a written constitution like most British jurisdictions. This Assembly is a sovereign lawmaker, which is to say that this Assembly and only this Assembly can decide what laws it will make. No one can direct this Assembly in that aspect, including the judiciary. If there were concern, if there were to be concern that pressure would flow from, for example, the European Court of Human Rights via and through our own domestic judiciary on human rights considerations, I think that is wholly unlikely. Yesterday I described the position that the Strasbourg Court takes on this area of life. It takes a very narrow view, and it's primarily concerned with whether sufficient safeguards are in place to protect the Article 2 right. So I don't, in any sense, foresee pressure coming through the law and through the judiciary to widen the scope of assisted dying in Jersey. If pressure is to come from, if the impetus is to come from anywhere to that end, it seems to me it will be political, not judicial. I hope that's helpful.
May I clarify, sir?
Well, you're not being asked to clarify anything you've said in your speech, I don't think. And your speech is concluded. I don't think there's a request for clarification from Deputy Breniff. Thank you, Conatar. Conatar of St Mary.
Thank you, sir. And I did wonder whether to contribute to this debate, given the excellent speeches on both sides already made, and I rise essentially to respond to one member who inferred that there was one had to vote for both options or none, and that it would be effectively a demonstration of acknowledging concerns on the part of the public if one only voted for Route 1 and not Route 2. I suggest, sir, there is a big distinction between the two, and the purpose of my standing is to explain why. From the beginning, I've decided that there are two essential ingredients to this legislation. Ingredients is probably the wrong word, characteristics. One is the right to choose, and the other is a free right to choose and the lack of coercion. Dealing with Route 1, it seems to me that the right to choose is clearly there, and I look at the possibility of coercion in that sense. And coercion is real, as the Constable St Helier said. It can be dealt with quite subtly, and I've been a lawyer too long to realise that subtlety can go to extremes. But in Route 1, we are dealing with situations where the end is deemed not to be less than 6 months, and I do question whether it is to anyone's advantage if they were to coerce a family member to take a decision which was not in accordance with that patient's own wish. And so, as far as Route 1 is concerned, I am relatively relaxed is the wrong word, but I am quite comfortable that coercion is an unlikely situation. And indeed, as Deputy Tadier pointed out, coercion may well come the other way from family urging their elderly relative not to take that course. Route 2 is a different matter. It does seem strange to me that, given the enormous strides that have been made in recent years to bring those with disabilities into the general public domain, we effectively set them apart in this bit of legislation. They are deemed to be a special category. And I can see why some of them feel that it is almost discriminatory to do so. The problem with Route 2 is that there may well be a considerable length of time before they are likely to depart this world, and that gives a considerable length of time for others to exert pressure on them in some way, and not least because of the financial burden that they might place on the family. And I do, as I say, appreciate the concern on the part of the vulnerable in that regard. Yes, it is the case that we have a suggestion that a tribunal to look at Route 2 applications, but like Deputy Balash, I do have certain concerns as to the breadth of their responsibility and what they are being asked to respond. For instance, I would like to see that tribunal at least have access to people other than the medical profession, lawyers who might wish to work out how the estate goes. I'm sorry to be mercenary, but that might well be an influencing factor. And also to ensure that with whom the patient has consulted within her family before making that decision. It is frequently the case that an elderly person has one main carer or visitor if he or she is in a nursing home, and we do not know whether what information that person gains is passed on to members of the family. And having seen numerous occasions where families have effectively broken up through disputes following the death of an elderly relative, I think it is incumbent upon the tribunal to ensure that all members of the family have been consulted in this, otherwise, if only for the sake of the future. So I think that is a leak, if I could call it that, which needs to be plugged. So I do have reservations about Route 2 for the reasons given. On the more general point, I had one email which I almost was quite dismissive about to start with. It was a one-liner which said, please vote against assisted dying, support palliative care instead. And I did not see the two as mutually exclusive. But clearly many residents in this island do, that they are aware that hospice, which is the prime provider of palliative care, is not state-run. And I would like to hear from the Minister in his address to give some assurance as to the amount of funding that hospice or palliative care generally will be given, and that to counter the concerns of many parishioners, that assisted dying and the cost of it will not be at the expense of palliative care. And again, I have sympathy with the words of the Constable St Helier as to the general position of the health service at the moment and why this should particularly be a priority, and that this particular aspect should be taken in the context of the whole health estate, and not just simply that. And finally, sir, I was and again, generally recognising the respect which all sides of the argument have given to this debate, and the public and the media. I was at a parish assembly earlier this week and was steeling myself for questions as to which way I was going to vote. In fact, the majority simply said that they didn't envy me my decision and states members. So I think it is consoling to some of us that the public as a whole are appreciative of the decision we have to make, and we must all make that decision according to our own conscience. Thank you, sir.
Commentator St Saviour, I think I was unnecessarily hasty when I said that you couldn't clarify what you wanted to clarify. I think under Standing Order 103D, you may explain any material part of your speech which you think somebody may have misunderstood, but not introduce any new matters. Is that your wish, to clarify something you've said?
Thank you, sir. Very kind, sir. Thank you. Yes, I was just sort of illustrating the point, which obviously the Solicitor General has touched on, that anything could be changed, that this Assembly cannot bind any future Assembly should they wish to take it further, or should there be a challenge from a higher court, UK or even European, in that respect, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir. The right to an assisted death is not just a legal or medical debate, but a deeply human one that touches the core of our values, our compassion, and our understanding of autonomy and dignity. This was always going to be a difficult debate, and one where every member of the Assembly, indeed every member of the public, will have a personal experience which influences their response to this proposition. In early 2020, the Minister for Health and Social Services made a commitment to commission a citizens' jury following significant community interest on assisted dying at a local level. I was selected as a member of the independent advisory panel to provide an objective voice to advise, check and challenge throughout the process. Having overseen the design of the jury process and having observed the delivery of the sessions, it is my view that the jury process was appropriate, balanced and robust. And this view was endorsed by the Public Accounts Committee in 2022, who commended the process as a model of best practice. At the conclusion of that process, and it was indeed a 9-week process, 78% of the jury members agreed that assisted dying should be permitted in Jersey and agreed that it should be possible for both routes. As a result of my involvement in the jury process, I've had the privilege to access a great deal of information, and I've carefully considered competing perspectives on assisted dying from recent approaches made by different groups. Before the recent change in government, I was a member of the Assisted Dying Ministerial Group, and on behalf of the then Council of Ministers, finalised outstanding matters before the lodging of the proposition. We took the decision, notwithstanding the findings of the ethical review, that Route 2 should be retained in the proposals presented to the Assembly on that basis that Route 2 was a central feature of not only the citizens' jury, but also the Assembly's decision-making in 2021. For this debate, I have carefully considered the detail of the proposition, Appendix A and the accompanying report. I've paid very close attention to the recently published scrutiny report of the Assisted Dying Review Panel, and particularly the subsequent ministerial response, which endorses the findings, clarifies some information, and accepts all of the recommendations. Like other members, I am grateful to everybody who's emailed me about this topic, those against and those in favour, for taking the time to share their views, all of which I've carefully considered. And like other members, I apologise for not being able to reply to all of them. At the heart of the argument for assisted dying is the principle of autonomy, the right of individuals to make informed decisions about their own lives. In the context of terminal illness, this includes the right to choose a dignified end rather than prolonged suffering. Respecting autonomy means acknowledging that competent individuals have the capacity to make decisions about their own well-being, including the manner and timing of their death. As a humanist, I believe that every adult with capacity who is intolerably suffering from an incurable physical condition and has a clear and settled wish to die should have the option of an assisted death. Being able to die with dignity in a manner of one's own choosing should be understood as a fundamental human right, and this position is supported by the European Court of Human Rights, outlined by several cases, but in particular the case of Debbie Purdy and Diane Pretty. Like other members, I do not believe that that is a right that only those who can afford to travel to Switzerland are able to die at the time of their choosing. Often patients will make that journey alone, fearing criminal repercussions for family members who accompany them. And we know from the Solicitor General yesterday that in the Jersey context, this issue can best be described as murky. Often they will have to go sooner than they would like in order to be fit enough to travel. For people who cannot afford to make that journey and effectively outsource their passing to Switzerland, the only legal option is to take more brutal action, and I consider that to be cruel and inhumane. The principles of justice demand that we treat individuals fairly and equally. Denying assisted dying to those who are terminally ill and suffering, whilst others can legally refuse life-sustaining treatment, creates a disparity. Palliative care has limits. It cannot give everyone the good death that they might wish for. It is unjust to force individuals to endure unbearable pain when the means exist to end their suffering peacefully and on their own terms. Compassion is the cornerstone of medical ethics. For many terminally ill patients, pain and suffering cannot be adequately managed by palliative care alone. In such cases, allowing those individuals to choose assisted dying is a compassionate response that respects their wish to avoid unnecessary suffering. It acknowledges the limits of medicine and the profound distress that can accompany the end of life. While palliative care has advanced significantly, it is not always sufficient to alleviate the suffering of all terminally ill patients. Concerns about potential abuses of assisted dying are valid and must be addressed through stringent safeguards and protocols. In jurisdictions where assisted dying is already legal, robust procedures are in place to ensure that only eligible patients, those who are terminally ill, suffering unbearably, and capable of making informed decisions, can access this option. And these protocols typically include multiple assessments by independent doctors, mental health evaluation, and waiting periods to ensure that the decision is always voluntary, settled, and well considered. This proposition not only mirrors those principles, it exceeds them, including a robust appeal procedure that doesn't often exist elsewhere. I consider the report to be well written, thorough, and measured. The safeguards in this proposition at Appendix A appear comprehensive and considered. They are clearly set out for both routes and are made stronger by the Assisted Dying Scrutiny Panel amendment around participation, which has been accepted by the Minister. And I'm reassured that the Assisted Dying Panel will continue in its important role until the draft Assisted Dying Law is debated in 2025. I consider the proposals to be well thought out, and the safeguards presented satisfy my concerns about safeguarding support for the vulnerable at this point in the process. Other jurisdictions have shown that assisted dying can be implemented safely and ethically, with strong safeguards in place to protect vulnerable individuals. Data from these countries indicate that fears of widespread abuse or a slippery slope have not materialised. Instead, assisted dying laws have provided relief and dignity to many who face unbearable suffering. The slippery slope argument suggests that legalising assisted dying could lead to broader and unethical practices, such as the euthanasia of non-consenting individuals. However, academic evidence from countries with illegal assisted dying shows that with proper safeguards, these concerns have not been realised. One author noted that there was no evidence to justify the grave and important concern often expressed about the potential for abuse, namely the fear that legalised physician-assisted dying will target the vulnerable or pose greater risk to people in vulnerable groups. And it found that there is no current factual support for the so-called slippery slope concerns about the risk of legalisation of assisted dying, concerns that death in this way would be practised more frequently on persons in vulnerable groups. Strict eligibility criteria, rigorous oversight, and transparency are shown to be effective in preventing misuse. One of the most common objections to assisted dying is belief in the sanctity of life, that life is inherently valuable and should be preserved at all costs. Whilst I completely agree that life is indeed precious, this argument must be balanced with respect for individual autonomy and the reality of unbearable suffering. Forcing individuals to endure a painful and dignified end can be seen as a violation of the sanctity of their lived experience and their right to make deeply personal decisions about their own lives. Like other members, I was moved by the testimony of a Jerseyman whose deeply moving account was published on Saturday in the Jersey Evening Post. This view was also communicated powerfully in the Jersey context by Alain Duchemin, a terminally ill Jerseyman who presented to the citizens' jury in April 2021. Alain said, "What makes anybody think that they have the right to force me to die in a particular way that I don't want? I cannot imagine for 1 second why anyone would think they have that right." For me, this debate is the second step of a three-step process. What we decide today will inform the drafting instructions that will produce a law that will be debated in this Assembly at the end of 2025. It is not the final step. There is ample time to ensure that the procedural and safeguarding concerns raised by members are addressed in greater depth, and I have no doubt that the Assisted Dying Scrutiny Review Panel will pay particular attention to members' concerns. For myself, I would like to understand more about the training regime for assessing doctors, for not assessing doctors, for those doctors who will assess whether assisted death will be permitted. In particular, details around coercion. I do have concerns about the residency criteria. I feel it's too short. I have concerns about clinical governance, which will need to be carefully addressed. And I will support the proposition to enshrine the provision of gold standard palliative care in the forthcoming adult safeguarding law. We have arrived at another crossroads where we can take the path of prolonging suffering or enhancing the dignity and autonomy of terminally ill people or those who endure unbearable suffering. I believe that we have to respect the right of individuals to end suffering on their own terms. I too have personal stories about loved ones who have died in distressing circumstances. I have sat at bedsides for days and weeks holding the hands of the dying, hoping for a quick release from pain and suffering, willing the end to come swiftly and peacefully. Sometimes it was a good death. Others, it was not at all what that person would have wanted for themselves, nor what our family wanted for them. I hold very specific views on how I would like my own death to be managed. Those views are well known to my family, and not all of my family agree with them. I do not share the same attitude to death and dying held by some religious believers, particularly that the manner and time of death are for a deity to decide, and that interference in the course of nature is unacceptable. So my support for this proposition stems from my belief that assisted dying is about embracing compassion, respecting autonomy, and recognising the limits of medicine. It's about providing a humane option for those who face terminal illness or unbearable suffering with no hope of recovery. I believe that individuals should have the right to make the same deeply personal decisions about their own deaths as they do about their own lives, supported by rigorous safeguards and ethical medical practice. I'd like to add my thanks to the Minister, present and previous, together with officers for a comprehensive proposition, appendix and report. This does not mean that I will support the draft law unless all of the safeguards are in place, but I do want to be able to decide upon a draft law in its entirety, one that includes Route 1 and Route 2, and it is for that reason that today I shall be voting to support the proposition in its entirety. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. And I know many members have acknowledged the emails, but I think the reason that we're all doing that is because this debate is very different. It has no party lines, it has no Council of Ministers lines, it has no lines apart from us as individual members who have the privilege of making decisions for Jersey have to make that decision. And I replied to many of those emails, sir, but I would like to say to those who I have just not been unable to, perhaps what I say today would simply have been my reply. So please take that as a reply, and I valued all of those views and read them thoroughly. So this is, without doubt, the most difficult debate and decision we will be involved in this Assembly. So I'd just like to roll back a little and focus on why we're here today. This is due to a previous vote in this Assembly to agree the principles, P95 2021, a vote that I supported. And now it's about agreeing more detail and setting up as an assisted dying service. And as was just previously mentioned very, very well, this draft law will come back in November 2025 and reaffirming the eligibility criteria, for example. So there are more stages to go through. But so we are asked today to consider two routes for in the primary legislation. The first is terminal illness. So I cannot imagine being diagnosed with terminal illness and what this means for an individual involved, their family and loved ones. Although I have to say, recent experiences brought me a little closer than ever before, but I've been lucky. But I cannot dismiss my experience of not being in that position. So therefore, sir, I am willing to enable those who face this circumstance to make a conscious decision about their own life. And I want to recognise, sir, the importance of control over decision-making for people facing terminal illness. One of the first casualties from illness of our health system can be a loss of control over decisions. To embed this choice at the end, to embed choice and control over those decisions at the end of life in our law will be a huge comfort to many. And so I note from the proposition, and I will quote from it a few times because I think we have to get back there. During the assessment process, the assessing doctor has a duty to ensure the patient is fully informed about all care and treatment options available to the person before they can be assessed as eligible. And I'll make that point and emphasise before they can be assessed as eligible. And to those who do not want to make this decision for any reasons, be that religious or moral reasons, this law does not take away the choice to not consider assisted dying. So I fully respect the many faiths and belief systems we enjoy in Jersey. I also believe that a faith system should respect those who do not hold similar beliefs. That is the key part of a tolerant and inclusive society. And we should remember, sir, and somebody has mentioned this, but I'll just re-emphasise, we always have the right to decline treatment of any form due to our own beliefs, due to the invasiveness of the treatment, or the side effects of that treatment. We can do that now. The legislation also states, and I quote, a person who has requested an assisted death may withdraw that request at any point up until the point of administration of the assisting dying substance. There are specific eligibility criteria built into this law and the requirement for capacity in decision making. So there are 16 provisions and safeguards built into the legislation. I'm absolutely certain members have read through them repeatedly like myself. That comes from the quality of the speeches that have been made and the depth of knowledge that everyone seems to be showing. And I compliment members and thank them for that. It's been so important for us as an Assembly. However, so there is an important point to point out. The criteria only apply to physical conditions and do not include mental or psychiatric illness or disorders. Neurodegenerative conditions, such as Alzheimer's disease, would fall within the physical conditions criteria. However, a person with Alzheimer's would only be eligible for assisted dying if they retain their decision-making capacity. My experience of my father, who had Alzheimer's at the end of his life, he would not have been able to make that decision, and I recognise that. There is also a provision for an assisted dying assurance committee. that amongst many responsibilities of that committee is to report on this service. And I think it's important we look at this granular detail. This includes collecting clear data on the service itself. And again, I'll go back to the report. The data included in the report will support identification of any trends or potential issues. This could, for example, potentially identify groups of people with similar characteristics who may be more or less inclined to request assisted dying, and as such may indicate requirements for changes to assisting support or treatment services. So there is a self-regulation, a self-identification built into this process. I think is a very important point. The early monitoring of requests for assisted dying is important to enable the development of tandem palliative care. And much has been made of the role of palliative care and the expression that we must improve palliative care before we offer any form of assisted dying. And so I agree that we need this area developed in full. But even with this, sir, I ask at which point that care becomes ineffective of removal of pain and suffering, and so that many, without this law, would be having to go through that pain and suffering at the end of their life, when we can make a choice to enable people to end that when they want to, at a point and a way they want to. And so what's the consequence of the treatment? I'll quote again, so I do tend to focus on the report, because I think that's where we're coming from, and this is what we're debating. Assisted dying, and this is quoted from the report, I'm afraid, I do apologise, I haven't referenced page numbers. Assisted dying does not replace palliative care and end-of-life care services. A person approaching the end of their life or living with serious illness should be provided the care and treatment they need to maximise their quality of life and minimise any suffering or distress. Assisted dying is an additional choice that some may make because they want control over the manner and the timing of their death. And that is a really important part of this legislation. It's very important to me. I do not see assisted dying as an alternative to palliative care. That goes against the very grain of everything I believe in. Indeed, the commitment to this and the incredible dedication of those involved with palliative care must be recognised by us all. So by allowing assisted dying, we enable those who choose to control their end of life the way that they want. And so I'm not going to address the slippery slope. That's been debated enough, and I think we have our position on that. But I think so. We need to be careful before we do that. I'll get back to what I've written. So perhaps the most difficult decision is around Route 2. Perhaps the most difficult decision. That of unbearable suffering. And again, it's almost impossible to understand being in this situation. I am therefore unable to deny those who are the right to their own choices regarding the end of their own life. But we must understand the definition of unbearable suffering. The problem being, sir, that this is something defined by the person suffering, and it is unique to every person. Therefore, there needs to be trust in the individuals and their experience. We all have different levels of tolerance for pain and suffering, whatever form we encounter it. And again, I see checks in place. For example, again from the report, where a person has an incurable physical condition and is eligible under Route 2, unbearable suffering, the coordinating doctor's approval must also be subject to confirmation by a tribunal. This is not the decision of a single coordinating doctor alone, a very important stage in this process. And further so, if the coordinating doctor has determined that the conditions above have been met, from paragraphs 352 to 358 sum that up, they will sign a Route 2 approval section of the administrative review form to confirm to the person in writing that the person's request for assisted dying has been provisionally accepted. The law will provide that a special tribunal must review the Route 2 approval decision made by the coordinating doctor and must either confirm or decline that approval. And there is a very important point. They will only review decisions to approve, not to decline. So there is an inbuilt balance there towards already approval or not giving, if you like, a second chance. That may be the wrong thing, but that's where we are. So the area we must consider consider the area of disability. And the question of the will enabling this law create pressure on those with disabilities being pressured to end their life. So our society, I will state in my belief, our society creates disability due to lack of access and inclusion. And in this context, I can try to understand the concerns that this law can create. But the solution is to address the poverty of understanding of disability in our society and address this in wider laws around discrimination and inclusion. We can do this and enable choices around the end of life in our society. The compassionate approach to enabling people with unbearable suffering to end their life. Finally, so there is the question of coercion and pressure to make decisions to end your life. It could be said that this exists around do not resuscitate orders and the current end-of-life pathways, which I have read some about and concern me greatly. Paragraph 56 of the report addresses these concerns, and there are 4 qualification areas that must be addressed. So I won't read them, I'm sure people have heard enough. To conclude, sir, it is in this debate where the personal becomes the political and vice versa. I would want to be able to choose when and how I end my life, should I be in the circumstances of terminal illness or unbearable suffering. I would want that choice for my family and my loved ones, regardless of how difficult it will be for me. And I want that right for all members of our community, for whom I hope the choice never needs to be made. For that reason, sir, as I've stated, I will be supporting all of the proposition, including Route 1 and 2. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. The Dean.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm very pleased to follow the previous 2 speakers, and I think that's been an illustration of just how measured this debate and respectful this debate has been since we began it yesterday. And I do actually want to start by thanking the Minister for the very even tone that he set at the very start. I know it's a subject that's close to his heart, as it is to many of us. I do feel I want to take my fellow accordion player, Deputy Tadier, to task, who has just walked in. I feel slightly that he's a bit of a victim of his own argument there. It's very easy to create a parody of a group that we disagree with and then attack that very parody. I think we can do better than that, and I think we need to respect all sides of this argument, regardless of whether it's religious or not. I'm interested to see that people are very keen to talk about religion, because I won't be. But members will know that I don't often rise to speak in this assembly, and you'll know that when I do, I very much see my role as offering a mirror to members to reflect on the decisions they are about to take. And one of the things I found really quite interesting to reflect on palliative care, for example, is that a couple of sessions ago, questions were raised about palliative care with the Health Minister, and we listened to the good news that more money would be available for palliative care, and it is good news, and I'm pleased to see that that's built into the proposition in various places. But we all knew, as we sat there, that it would be down to volunteers, professional fundraisers and charity shops to raise the lion's share required to run much of the palliative care in this island. No one said, what a terrible scandal this is, that this is not fully funded by the states. What an indictment it is on our society that our healthcare system does not fully provide for those who are in their final days, and that it's the third sector instead who deliver much of it. In the last 7 years as I've sat here, feels like 5 minutes, I've no recollection of anyone bringing a proposition to fund palliative care fully. Why is it we've not formed dignity groups to address this, or taken surveys of the population, or a petition on the government website? Why have we not had a citizens' jury on this and brought in ethicists to look at the, frankly, utter disgrace that is our readiness to leave it to the willing and the wealthy to raise enough money to help assisted living for those who have a terminal prognosis? One might say we haven't even got assisted living on track, never mind flourishing yet, and yet here we are today. offer that as a reflection. With an £18 million deficit in our health budget, a new hospital to build, and issues recruiting medical staff, I can't see that changing anytime soon. So you need to take note of the priorities argument that was made earlier by the Constable of St Helier. Some may suggest it's incongruous that we will legislate for people to take their own lives or allow others to do so with extraordinary dispatch, really, compassionate dispatch, whilst others wait weeks and months for procedures or operations or for a consultation for a cancer scare. There is, incidentally, a current waiting list of 10,761 people waiting for a first outpatient appointment. But actually, with all the arguments that we've heard, all the concerns that people have with mission creep and slippery slopes and safeguards, or whether we go route 1 or route 2, or concerns that there's been a foot on the scales in the process, it actually boils down to this: what kind of society do we want to be? And that's really what I want to reflect on as you make this decision, you. And I really don't envy you that task in this debate. But I do want to say, be very careful what you wish for. Because the obvious answer is we want a compassionate society, and we've heard really compelling arguments for it, and they've been very moving too. We want a society where people can make an informed choice that is right from them. Who on earth can possibly say, well, you can't have that? It is compelling. But I do want to put to you that this is not just about personal ethics and personal choice. This is not just about autonomy. And frankly, we make decisions all the time in this assembly limiting personal autonomy, often for the greater good. That, amongst other things, is what a legislature does. It seeks to find the balance in giving people freedom whilst protecting the most vulnerable. The Solicitor General made that clear yesterday, that a balance is to be had in human rights. So this isn't a simple case of looking at the scales of compassion and saying, of course it's the right thing to do for the small minority of people whose suffering will be alleviated. This is also about us asking the question, what is on the other side of that set of scales? What is the price that we pay? Deputy Miles, excellent speech by the way, talked about residency concerns and compliance issues and those other things which sit somewhere in that balance. And I would add that despite our safeguards and best of intentions, autonomy can be subject to many external pressures, many of which we have no control over, and those pressures weigh differently and heavily on different people. And they will not all be stopped by doctors and tribunals. And I wish the concerns that we had were imaginary. I wish that was the case, but I don't believe it is the case. For the robust and the together, yes, this will give them choices based on their rights. For the vulnerable, the bewildered, the elderly and the voiceless, that autonomy can become something far more sinister, to the point where people do feel a burden and there is indirect social pressure outlined by Deputy Jeune yesterday. And I absolutely support the Deputy's comments on the need for some further thinking around a strategy for the elderly, especially with our ageing population. I certainly hope that comes in before we have the next debate on this. But it would be fantastically naive to think that people won't come under some kind of indirect societal pressure, especially under Route 2. As a priest, I've seen grooming at every level. In 35 years of ministry, I've seen humanity at its absolute best in death, and sadly at its absolute worst. As the old saying goes, where there's a will, there's a family. So let's not pretend that this will not impact upon those who are vulnerable, or that there is a very real possibility of abuse. It's often hidden. That is the nature of it. Human nature tells us otherwise. And actually, whilst the Minister addressed that in his opening speech, it would take an incredibly robust set of safeguards to protect people at every level. So you need to consider that in this debate. Because I don't believe it is paternalistic or patronising to suggest that some people will not always have capacity to make the right choices. You only have to look at how many older or vulnerable people are scammed out of their life savings to see that people will always seek to exploit others for gain, even around the end of life. Route 2, in my view particularly, will open up the possibility of that much more. You have to decide whether giving some the autonomy they seek to allow them to end their lives is not happening at the expense of other issues on the other side of those scales. Yes, the argument for is being championed by people who are confident and articulate and in the name of personal choice. There is little risk to those people, sir, but the risks affect those least able to speak for themselves. They always do. We all know abuse is often hidden. So this is not just about personal ethics, but societal ethics. A seismic change in how we understand life and a huge shift in our understanding of community and those who are a part of it. You need to reflect on that. This is about how we place value on human beings at different points in their lives, across different sections of our community, and there needs to be an ethical balance that is dispassionate. You need to be confident about that balance and take into account the wider issues beyond personal autonomy and choice. And I would say to this Assembly, as an example of that, 3 years ago, COVID came along, and we all gave up our personal autonomy and personal choice. Now, why did we do that? It's because we considered the most vulnerable in our midst and those who were most at risk, and we adjusted our behaviour accordingly. That is societal ethics, and I would add that this Assembly led the way in that. So really the question to reflect on there is, what has changed? What have we learnt from that experience, and what would we do if it happened again in the light of what we're discussing today? And another area where I would like to focus your thoughts as we reflect is the impact upon medical staff. I was very surprised to learn that our doctors and nurses will not be surveyed about assisted dying until after this debate. I find myself at a slight loss as to why that's the case, and maybe the Minister will make that clear in his summing up. But surely above all else, this Assembly would want to be informed about what medical staff right across the board think about this important ethical matter. And this will set staff at odds with each other. Yes, there's an opt-out clause, but this is a very small island. And what about those care homes where the managers are happy to allow it on their premises, but whose staff may object? There seems to be no protection for the private sector who out of conscience may object. At least I haven't found that in the document. What impact will this have on current staff levels? Will medical practitioners leave the island if this proposition becomes law? These are questions you need to consider. And if staffing requirements cannot be met on the island, we are told in the risk assessment on page 165 that HCS will look to engage UK-based staff to work on a contract basis. Just think about that for a moment. Will that include those who will test for capacity? Many of the capacity assessments for long-term restrictions of liberty are currently being undertaken by locum psychiatrists in the island, and they are paid per assessment. Just think about that for a moment. One of them recently said, there is little personal investment in spending time deliberating. That should concern you, regardless of your view on this proposition. And I also want to reflect on the drugs that will be used. We were told yesterday that in 3 years' time they will probably be different anyway, and we can't know about them because if you publish that information, it would lead to unscrupulous use of them, and I'm sure that's true. So to be clear, you, the states members who are making this decision, will know nothing about the failure or complication rates of those drugs that will be approved. When I asked at the briefing what happens if a person reacts badly to the substances, as everyone's biology is different, the response I received was, then they will have a protracted and difficult death. This is not like putting your pet down. And for those who think that it is, you might like to know that one of the highest suicide rates in any profession at the moment is in veterinary doctors. My nephew is one, and I asked him why, and he said, I do 10 euthanasias a week. It grinds us down. You must be careful and reflect that you don't find yourself writing an ethical or moral blank check in these intricate areas, especially surrounding Route 2. So I urge you to reflect on these things. So what sort of society do we want to be? Now, in some ways, you've answered that question. In 2022, we debated the Children and Young People's Law, which now ensures that all children and young people in Jersey will grow up safely, will learn and achieve, live healthy lives, and be listened to. In March of this year, Jersey's Youth Parliament overwhelmingly rejected assisted dying. The vote was 9 against and 5 for, with 1 abstention. I think that is worth reflecting on as we have this debate. If you really do care about the voice of our young people, and that we are not just being paternal and patronising. What kind of society do we want to be? Yes, of course we want to be compassionate, and that is to be applauded. And I've been really impressed with the quality of the speeches on both sides of the argument. But it needs balance. We are not, for example, keeping pace with dementia care. And there are a lack of resources. We're due a dementia strategy in June that will not include support for patients, families and caregivers. But we will pay to end your life after you've lived in Jersey for a year. That's an interesting balance to reflect on. It's been said that that assisted dying is like an emergency exit. You may not need it, but it's good that it's there. I thank the Minister for that comment. Well, in recent times, we have seen emergency exits blow out of some aircraft because they were not robust enough in design or inspected with the proper frequency. You must be absolutely sure, especially with Route 2, that you are not creating a scenario where you are discouraging the terminally or chronically ill from making the most of their lives and instead seeing themselves as a burden. You must be absolutely sure, in your desire to be compassionate, that you're not creating a system in which people with mental health issues, the elderly, all those other vulnerable people are not subconsciously urged to end their lives by the very institution which is meant to protect them.
Your time for speaking has come to an end, Mr. Dean.
Thank you, sir. What kind of society do we want to be? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. And it's not always going to be easy to follow the Dean. This is a very personal and emotional debate for us all, and I do like to thank all the officers' work that they have done to leading us here, and all the public for all of their emails and correspondence. Like many others, I have not been able to reply to all as the volume has been so great. I started off when knowing that this debate was coming, understanding that I supported Route 1 in its entirety, because when you get to that point at the end, there is anxiety that comes when you have been told that you have a fixed time in which you have left to live, and your end will be unknown to you, that there is a certain amount of control that we would all like to gain back. And I think Route 1 very much provides this for people to help alleviate anxiety so that those last couple of months, days, hours can be as comfortable and as relaxed as possible, and people have the right to choose the manner in which they leave. I must admit that when this whole debate first started again, though, Route 2 did provide me with concerns. And these concerns all came a different way. Yes, the rights of coercion reared its head. Whether people are doing it for the right reasons entered my mind. In conversations with the staff, the policy officers that have put this together, for me, the process that comes out of what Route 2 allows covers off where my doubts sat. And it was only actually when a constituent came into one of our constituency surgeries and was telling us their story about an operation that they had had on their spine, which had led to complications. The complications led to pain, led to suffering. And it was only by coming to speak to a deputy that they managed to then get to speak to more people within health that then looked at their situation as a whole package of where it started, because the GP wasn't able to necessarily have full responsibility. The surgery this person had received was done within the UK, and there was just a mix of what was going on. Now, this person said that they had intended on taking their own life, but had been stopped by the fact that their son had returned home from school 5 minutes earlier than they had expected. And then that made me start to think about, actually, there is a whole group of people on this island who have to deal with the consequences of suicide as part of their roles. And these are professionals with the police service, the fire service, the ambulance service, with people who have to, and members of the public, members of family, who have to discover those who have completed suicide. These people have to deal with that trauma every day. There are many professionals who continuously suffer from PTSD because they are the person who have had to discover and deal with a situation where somebody has completed suicide. So when we talk about unbearable suffering, because this is what Route 2 targets on, it's unbearable suffering, it is subjective to individuals, and if somebody is suffering unbearably and they want to end their own life, they will find a way. And somebody has to find them. And so if this unbearable suffering can be approached in a different way, this individual who Deputy Mezek and I met, not only would their case, when they had applied for an assisted death, their case would have then been reviewed, that all their medical history would have been brought to one place where someone may have actually found alternatives which would have prevented their need to consider taking their own life. They could have found treatment, and they could have been able to, they weren't going to be cured, but they could have been provided with a way that stabilised them to enjoy the maximum of their life that there was remaining. The review panel, in my opinion, I feel it is the right step to take. That somebody is then looking, well, actually, have all these things been considered? Have other things been reviewed before someone gets to that point? The 90 days that is required for someone to go down Route 2 allows enough time that these factors can be considered by everybody involved in the process. I feel there is also enough within that 90 days that if people are seeing signs of coercion, one person is constantly there, one person is constantly saying, well, you did say this, or, you did say that. Actually, there is points where people are going to say, well, there is something that is making me feel uncomfortable right now about this. Actually, I will raise my concerns, and people can see it. We are also looking at... sorry, I'm forgetting where I was going. Unfortunately, I didn't write down a speech because, like I said, I feel that this one is more emotional, and I think we need to consider our own rights of choice. And so we talk about being a burden. Now, I'm somebody who is fiercely independent, and I like my autonomy. My wife calls it stubbornness. The fact that I will not let her do things for me. Even I'm somebody who suffers with a bad back. When I have a flare-up, standing up becomes difficult for me. But I still won't allow her to do things for me because I respect my own autonomy. And I can't... I know my wife would do anything for me. But if I get to my end... If I get to my end, I do not want her to do the things that I don't want her to do for me. And I want this to be my choice. And I think that by denying anybody their right to choose when they get into that situation, that is not fair. But I also respect that there are people who will not wish to do this service. There are people who do not want this to be their choice. And I also support that. So the fact that this entire process is completely opt-in and not opt-out is where I find my balance with all this. Medical staff who do not think that this is ethical do not have to take part. Medical staff that believe this is ethical sign in to do it. Individuals who do not think that this is right for them, it's not a case that you have to turn down the service. The service will not be offered to you. If this is the service that you think that you want, you will then have to go to somebody to make the start for this process. And sir, for me, that is the epitome of choice. And that's what we should all respect. So I do urge all members to vote in support of both routes 1 and 2.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. Firstly, like others, I would also like to start by recognising and respecting the work of the Minister, the former Health Minister, and all the officers who've worked so hard in developing this proposal. It's clearly a very detailed, thorough and thoughtful piece of work, and instigated, of course, not of their volition, but by the last Assembly. I'd also like to thank all constituents who have written, come to surgeries, and asked me to meet to discuss. I think the only thing that I'm sure we can all agree in terms of the input we've had from constituents and from the public is that views entirely boil down to a simple matter of for or against. There is very little middle ground, in fact no middle ground to be had in this debate and this decision. And whatever we do today, very large numbers of people would be disappointed by the outcome. I came into politics to make things better. I'm sure we all did, whether that's for the island as a whole or for some section of our community. And we have all taken decisions that have affected lives, hopefully for the better. I believe I have done that, both as a minister and as a member of this Assembly, that I have made decisions that have made lives better. But this decision, at its most basic, is about the loss of life. And in reaching it today, we have to decide whether we are making things better. And I agree with others that have said this is no place for abstention. If you cannot vote for the proposition, then you should vote against. And equally, if you have to vote against, then you should vote against. As it is for or against, that's clear. I've been very conflicted in this for some time. I have said previously, during the hustings, that the election, and I don't think without necessarily making a commitment, but I have said that I support assisted dying in principle. But there are issues that concern me, having read some of the vast number of emails that we've all received. And we have, it has to be said, heard some very extreme arguments. So first of all, I don't believe that assisted dying in Jersey or elsewhere is part of some huge global governmental conspiracy to reduce their health budgets. That's not what people are doing. Nobody has suggested we're doing this as a means of saving money, and I don't believe any other jurisdiction has done so either. The fact that some quite large jurisdictions have published numbers about what they think it has saved them is a fact that's relevant to those jurisdictions. We also have to remember that while there is a move towards assisted dying, those countries who permit it are still very much in the minority. Others may adopt it, but we are still in the early stages of assisted dying. Part of me, quite a large part of me, struggles with the idea that there are families out there just waiting to get rid of their older relatives. There are some 10,000 people, we believe, in Jersey caring for relatives. I've met some of them, and I've always been impressed by their commitment, and they care for their families with love and respect. They don't consider their families to be a burden. We should avoid a situation where family members think they're a burden. When I was younger, in my possibly late teens and 20s, my parents used to say to me, and my brothers, we don't want to be a burden. When we get old, we don't want to be a burden. Put us in a home. They were very clear about that. Put us in a home. My mum is going to be 88 next week, and I can tell you that wild horses would not get her into a care home. She's very independent, and she's not a burden by any means. She will be here in June. Please don't tell her I said that.
We all respect our elders and our families and our... Similarly for people with disabilities, in my experience, I have known 2 families within my direct and extended families who have had a significantly disabled child, and that child has been the centre of the family. They have been loved and adored, and both families have done everything they can to give that child, both of whom lived well into adulthood, the best life they possibly can. And both families were absolutely devastated when those children passed as adults. But I absolutely recognise the fear and concern which some older and disabled people view the theory of assisted dying. And it's important that we ensure there are support mechanisms there for everybody who need it. And we do have, Jersey does have safety nets. We've talked a lot about healthcare, palliative care, both of which do exist to some degree or other, regardless of what our views are on funding. But we also have safety nets through long-term care and income support. Social care is as important as healthcare in this context. We need to make sure that people are provided and continue to be provided with care, whether that's in a care home or whether it's in their own homes. We do have those mechanisms, and we need to work hard to make sure that those continue. Because nobody should ever be in a situation where they're seeking assisted dying because of poverty. And we also have to be alert to that and be sure that support is available. However, we can't ignore issues around coercion. We have spoken in the last few months, in the last year, we have spoken a lot, some people have spoken very passionately about the report into violence against women and girls and the prevalence of coercive control. Can we really be sure that that will not be an issue in the context of assisted dying? We do have to think about that very, very carefully and make sure that coercion is considered at all stages of the process. I've also encountered families who are not harmonious when it comes to the money of a relative, nor indeed to their care where that person lacks capacity. And we do have to be certain that family disputes and the behaviour of families are not themselves a contributor to a decision for assisted death. One of the things that concerns me most is the test for capacity, what that test will be, how it will be assessed, and by whom. I have considerable experience of capacity in my previous role. I was involved in the preliminary work before the capacity and self-determination law came into effect in 2018, and in its post-implementation phases, and I was often regularly appointed as a delegate for people who didn't have capacity to manage their finances. We have to be sure that people do understand questions. I've been told a story about an older woman with capacity issues who goes to the doctor, who discusses with them at length a possible eye surgery and eye care for their eyes. And they say, do you understand? And the person says, yes, I understand. They have the treatment and their eyesight is damaged beyond redemption because they didn't understand. And the fact that someone says, yes, I understand, does not mean that they have capacity and that they actually do understand the implications of what they're doing. This is absolutely essential that we consider this carefully. What I have seen in the context of people having delegates appointed where they don't have capacity is that we have a medical opinion which says there is a medical impairment, and we have a capacity assessment. The capacity assessments in those cases are often, in fact quite regularly now, done by a social worker. And it's become clear that over time, as people have become more familiar with the exercise, it has become not quite a box-ticking exercise, but that people have a toolkit of questions and exercises that they use to assess capacity. Assessing capacity to pay your bills and understand the value of money is quite different from assessing capacity to request assisted dying, and it is essential we get this right. We also have to consider very carefully the impact of pain on the balance of the mind. I had an experience in my 40s of pain, not constant, not chronic pain, but regular and excruciating pain. And I know that I had thoughts at those times that I have never had at any other time in my life. Not suicidal thoughts, but thoughts of self-harm. I've never thought that ever, but that is what the pain led me to think about. And we have to remember the impact of pain on a person's mental state. And we have to make sure that anybody considering assisted dying is given full advice about treatments and that they understand all the options available to them. And I would suggest that assisted dying should only be discussed with a patient once all other treatment options have been considered and possibly even exhausted, because of the impact of pain on the mind. It's also important that we consider the impact on families. People have said that this is not suicide. At the risk of treading on the solicitor's toes, a coroner, in making an assessment or a decision that someone has committed suicide, has to make a finding, and I paraphrase because I haven't checked the actual wording. They have to be satisfied that a person has taken an action, that that action will or has resulted in their death, and they took that action with the intention of it resulting in their death. It's not the criminal burden of proof anymore. But those requirements all happen with assisted dying. And the impact on a family of an assisted death may be no worse, or may be entirely the same, of an unexpected suicide. Suicide is always unexpected, I would suggest. Families are devastated by suicide, and I found that some of the most heartbreaking stories we've heard about assisted dying in other jurisdictions is cases where families say they didn't know. The first they knew that their relative was having an assisted death was when they had a phone call from a clinic telling them that the relative had died. That's appalling, and we can't allow that to happen. Families have to be involved in the process, and they have to be given the opportunity to comment, because some families may be devastated. If you know that your relative perhaps has 6 months left to live, you may want to have every minute with that relative that is existing. You may not want them to take an early death. You may want to try and help them as much as you can, and that is often what families say with suicide. If only we had known, we would have done something. It is, however, about choice. We give choice. We take choice away in many other cases. But we have to reflect that we have started a process, and once we introduce assisted dying, I can see no circumstance in which it will be withdrawn. It will remain, and it is likely to extend as it has done in other jurisdictions. So I suggest that by voting for Route 1, we are also voting for Route 2, because it will come. It will come. The team have clearly done a huge amount to create safeguards and make sure that people are protected as far as we can, and that their decisions are fair, voluntary and settled. But it has also, it has to be said, created a massive bureaucracy, a patient record with 15 documents and numerous assessments. How will someone who is suffering and in pain with a terminal illness cope with that? Really, how long will it take? The tribunal that will consider unbearable suffering, or Route 2, has to consider that. That tribunal has to be able to sit very quickly, and I can't put words in the bailiff, the deputy bailiff's mouth, but if I was establishing that tribunal, I would need at least 9 people to be sure that it is ready to sit at all times when people need it to make decisions. I do also suspect that over a period, as many other things, with implementation reviews, we will see the process becoming more streamlined, with some of the checks and balances dropping out as we become more comfortable that we know what's happening and that people are safe. I think that's almost certain to happen. But most of all, we need to talk about death. We need to understand what people want. I didn't see MD die. I haven't seen MD die in a long period of suffering. I knew what my dad wanted at end of life, and I knew that made the decisions we had to make at that time easier. It's important that we know what our loved ones want. It's important that we tell them what we want. We can already make advanced decisions to refuse treatment. We do have to get better at talking about death, being clear what people want, and being sure at all stages of our life that we check with them and that they haven't changed their mind. My dad always said he didn't want to be kept alive by a machine and that he wanted to be cremated. As I said, that made things easier, but in the end, it was never an easy decision. But knowing what he wanted makes those decisions easier. It makes it easier for the family. I'm not going to encourage people to vote one way or the other because everybody has to do what's right for them. But we do all have to make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Doublé.
Sir, could I seek your advice as the main respondent? My understanding is that I do not have a time limit on my speech, and as
That's
such,
correct, yes.
Thank you. My speech will be at least 20 minutes, I would say, so members may wish to adjourn now and permit me to speak after the adjournment.
I think members seem to want to carry on. Yes, Deputy.
I'm happy to, sir. Thank you. Before I begin my speech, sir, I wish to clarify that there will be two parts to it. I will begin by speaking as chair of the Assisted Dying Review Panel, and I will then give my own views as a deputy representing the people of the parish of St Saviour and as a person with non-religious humanist beliefs. So I accepted the Scrutiny Liaison Committee's request to chair the review panel into assisted dying 2 months ago. I am so grateful that Deputy Catherine Curtis and Deputy Philip Balash agreed to form the membership with me. And as you can see from the speeches of both of these members, between us we hold a diversity of viewpoints on the issue, which we declared at the start of the review, and indeed we set those aside, and we all have a willingness to engage in constructive debate. We took the task very seriously, and I am grateful to the deputies and also to the officers, the excellent officers who worked with us to produce the report. And I also thank members who have read the report and considered it and mentioned it in their speeches today. So the Minister's decision to shorten the lodging period, and I understand this given the importance of this issue to him, it did mean that as a panel we worked at an unprecedented pace, and I'm really proud of the way we've given full and robust consideration to these issues and presented an evidence-based report. We took time to carefully examine the considerable existing body of evidence, including the citizens' jury materials, and I was really interested to hear about that process from Deputy Miles. We considered the in-principle proposition from the previous Assembly, the Phase 2 consultation feedback report, the ethical review, and of course the proposition lodged by the current Minister, including all appendices and case studies. Our report focuses in on the key issues and decision points, including safeguards, patient dignity, eligibility criteria, training and guidance, including the detection and prevention of coercion, the ability to object or opt out of or to not participate, the importance of palliative care, and other things. I really do hope that the report has aided members in their deliberations on this issue. And so I ask members, if they haven't had a chance to look at it, it's not too late. Please look at it over the lunch break and factor it into your decision making, particularly the 4 key recommendations. We have several recommendations, but we singled out 4 of them as being particularly important. And so members should not simply view the Minister's proposals in isolation. My view is that they are excellent proposals, but no policy is perfect. And so some concerns that have been raised about the political leadership in this area, particularly following the review hearing, which we carried out, which actually I invite members and the public to view online and make up their own mind. To be fair to the Minister, perhaps that was as a result of the short time since taking up office. And I now understand, following further dialogue with the Minister and speeches from other members, that he has maintained the position of the previous Minister, and I thank her also for her work, and the group of ministers who were directing policy on this. And I think this is a really good example of how, when it matters, we can progress things in the best interests of islanders across political divides. So I would like to respond to a point raised by the Minister in his opening speech around the ethical review and Route 2. And it was not simply the advice of the ethical review where they did not, they advised against Route 2. It was not simply that caused the panel to question its inclusion. It was the inability to provide an adequate explanation in terms of political leadership and the rationale for including that. And I had to present that, sir, as evidence. I had to present the evidence as I found it, and indeed as the panel saw it. It must be noted that this was one of the findings included in our report, and the Minister has since provided this rationale in his response. And again, Deputy Miles urged members to look at that response from the Minister, because the Minister has accepted all of our recommendations. I listened to the Minister's speech yesterday, and he gave a good defence of Route 2, and I hope that he will be able to further focus in on that in his summing up. And so I want to point out to members at this point that in the process of undertaking this review, I decided, despite my own personal beliefs, which members know I am a humanist, and I will come to that later, despite my personal beliefs, if the proposals that I was scrutinising did not stand up to that scrutiny and did not safeguard vulnerable islanders and uphold the dignity of those who are suffering and dying, that I would be prepared to vote against them. And I would have absolutely made that call, sir. Scrutiny, as we know, is a process of identifying gaps. And we did identify some, one of which was the rationale behind the inclusion of unbearable suffering, or Route 2, which I've discussed. And this is a normal part of the process. And our recommendations within our report serve to plug those gaps. Sir, I will reiterate, the Minister has accepted all of the recommendations that the panel have made. So I feel, sir, that now the Minister's proposals, which contain the expertise of the officers who have worked tirelessly on this for, I think, over 2 years, and all of the consultation with the public who we're here to represent, together with the scrutiny review and the recommendations, I think this leaves the Assembly with something which is robust and which gives solutions to many of the big questions that I know members shared with the panel. Some of those questions, as I said, feature in our 4 key recommendations. Those are what we felt were the most important issues. One of them was tackled by our amendment. So this focused on the ability to not participate in the provision of assisted dying. And we clarified this so that any kind of participation can be declined. No one would ever be forced to participate in the provision of assisted dying. And I want to thank Deputy Balash for raising that issue, and his ability to analyse the law was where that was identified. So those with deeply held beliefs against assisted dying will be protected from having any part in it. And I thank the Minister for accepting that amendment. Another of our key recommendations was the location of assisted dying. A panel member felt that those who did opt for an assisted death should be able to access this in a location of our choice, and we were persuaded that this was extremely important. We have 2 other key recommendations, and both of these recommendations require the Minister to take some action between the debate today and the debate on any legislation that comes forward. And we have asked the Minister to take this action and to provide accompanying evidence of that action no later than 2 months before any debate on the legislation. And again, the Minister has agreed, he has committed to do this, sir, in writing in his response. So of these final 2 key recommendations, the first focuses on palliative care. I would really like to hear more on this today, actually, not just 2 months before the legislation, but today, please, sir, from the Minister in his summing up speech. He did touch on it in his opening speech, and he commended the hospice care that's available locally, and I absolutely echo that. But I think it's clear this is a significant concern, so I would like to hear more on that from the Minister and how he is going to address this key recommendation and his confidence in delivering that evidence to members before the legislation is debated. So we have asked that he should publish a plan to evidence the quality and availability of palliative and end-of-life care in Jersey. So that will be a separate document. We will have that 2 months at least before the debate on the legislation. That gives me confidence, sir, that the Minister has accepted that. And our work won't stop, sir. We will be scrutinising this. We will not be complacent. I have heard members' views on this, and I have heard the views of the public that this is absolutely critical. So this is something that we will be focusing on in our ongoing work. And the final of these 4 key recommendations, and it's the other one whereby we have asked for information to be delivered to members to the Assembly no less than 2 months before the debate on the legislation. It's around coercion. And again, I know that members share this as a key concern. We couldn't see within the documentation details on how this would be tackled. And so I looked at one of the appendices was details of the training. There wasn't information in there on how the identification and the prevention of coercion would be accounted for in the training. So we have asked the Minister to provide that to evidence how that is going to be accounted for in the training of anyone who's providing assisted dying. And again, sir, the panel will follow up on this. The Minister won't be doing this work in isolation. Scrutiny will be there as a critical friend. That is our core function as part of this States Assembly, and I give my commitment to continue doing that work. So I'd like to touch on something that more than 1 or 2 members have said, and the phrase was that there is no going back. And I want to counter that by looking at the proposition. So we have the main parts of the proposition, and then there is an appendix which has, I think, possibly 19 parts, possibly more. It's number 17. If members can turn to that if they have it open. So number 17, sir, gives the Jersey Care Commission absolute authority to shut the assisted dying service down in the event of any hint of any potential failings. Again, I have confidence in that body. They're really, that assurance, sir, to me is there, that if any kind of issues are identified and at any point in the process, it's a cancel clause. The service would be stopped by the Care Commission, whether we liked it or not. That power would be within that body. So there is a way to go back there. Where there really is no going back is if somebody is suffering and they are allowed to die this horrible death. So I would like to take my scrutiny hat off now. I think it's time to do that. But again, I would urge members to have a look at that report, please. If you haven't done so and you do have concerns, have a look at the report over the lunch hour. Because as a scrutiny panel, I think it's fair to say that we have very high standards of this Minister, and we have expected high standards, and we will continue to expect those as we continue to scrutinise this area. So my scrutiny hat is now off, sir. And I think members are aware that the Minister and I, in terms of our political views on this, are in alignment. And I thank him for continuing this work and for bringing it forwards today. I'm a humanist, sir, and people often ask what this means to me. Sorry, sir. So my humanist beliefs means that I have a deep concern for my fellow human beings. I strive to live a full and meaningful life, and I determine my own values based on reason and empathy. And it also means I'm committed to helping others do the same. My humanist beliefs include each individual human being has an absolute right to live by their own personal values and the freedom to make decisions about their own life, so long as this does not result in harm to others. Humanists feel a responsibility to their fellow humans and act not just in their own best interests, but in the interests of wider society. And Humanists UK and the Channel Islands Humanists have been campaigning on this issue for that very reason, and I thank them for the work that they do representing non-religious islanders. And in particular, I want to thank Nathan Stillwell, who has worked to represent Channel Islands Humanists, and his compassion and expertise has, I know, been very welcome. But Sarah, it's not just the humanists I'd like to thank, actually, and other members have done this, but I genuinely am so grateful to see the engagement and the campaigning on both sides, because it has helped me to fully understand what people think about this. And I think in Jersey, there is a level of apathy, and that's often what's missing. We don't have that campaigning and that engagement, and it's so critical. And so with each email that has come into to my inbox, and there have been many, I have not responded with my views during this scrutiny process because I was resolute in keeping a neutral head. But I have read those emails. And in terms of my own views, I have tested my thinking, and I have tested my own views and my own beliefs, my deeply held beliefs. I've weighed and measured them. And I thank the members of the public that have taken the time to communicate with us so that we could give that consideration to their views. But so there is something that factors very heavily in my thinking, not just in scrutiny, but when I'm considering issues as an individual member. And perhaps it's because of my background in psychology and my training in using statistical research methods. But I give a lot of weight to statistical evidence, and I think we all should. I have 3 main points there that I'd like to make. And the first of these points is statistical evidence shows that the people of Jersey overwhelmingly support both routes of assisted dying. Our inboxes, sir, are not representative. People who oppose these measures have been motivated to write in, but we must also consider the silent majority. We have a duty to represent those islanders and to take their views into account too. The gold standard in terms of determining what our population wants can be found when statistical methods are used which are based on representative samples of the population. So that means a group of people, whether it's for a focus group, a smaller group, or a larger sample data set, where that group of people represents broadly what our population looks like. It's that kind of data that we can actually use to understand what the people think. And we've had that with, there have been many UK polls carried out, which we are very much like the UK, and we can give some regard to those. But so we invested a lot of money into a process which was a group of people selected who were broadly representative of our population, and that's the citizens' jury. The citizens' jury, 78% were in favour of both routes of assisted dying. Another figure was quoted earlier by a poll which was carried out recently. I think it was by Island Global Research. And I analysed some of the demographic information, which they very helpfully provided alongside. I would have liked a bit more, and I may ask them for the raw data for the scrutiny panel. But when you look at the demographics of the people who completed that poll, and it was a self-selecting poll, so people could opt into it. It was sent to their whole database, I believe. So 61% of people who completed that poll, I think it was 577 people, 61% of people were in favour of assisted dying to some degree. So that is a majority of the public. But actually, when you look at the demographics, there were nearly 60%, I think 59% of those who completed that poll declared themselves to have Christian beliefs. And I think so we can deduce from that given that sample was hugely over-representative of those with a religion, that actually it's a lot more than 61%. To me, that's a majority. That's enough in itself to listen to that majority. But it's going to be a lot more than 61%. I will remind members that actually only 39% of islanders have any religion in our island. And that data comes from the JOLS survey, which is statistically robust, as it is based on a sample which is representative of our population. So I'm convinced, sir, that our citizens want Route 1 and Route 2. And that's the evidence that has convinced me. The second point I'd like to make is Route 2 is safe. I am confident of that. There are extra measures that do not exist with Route 1, additional waiting periods. There is a tribunal, a likelihood of more assessments and scrutiny. Again, in the materials that we have been given from the Minister, there were several case studies. And again, I thank him for this because I found those case studies so helpful. I read them first, actually, so I went to those. And they really ironed out some of the concerns that I had. Again, if members haven't had a chance to read them, please do so over the lunch break. It is not just one or even two doctors who are the gatekeepers to accessing Route 2. It is a multidisciplinary team. There would be also a nurse and a social worker and any other relevant allied health professionals. Again, sir, we have this clause that says if the Jersey Care Commission has any concerns, it can be shut down. I would urge members to err on the side of compassion, given all of these safeguards. I have been told by people who are experts on this and understand the international context that what we are doing in Jersey and what the Minister has put before us today is excellent, and we should be proud of it, and that it is safe. And I ask, sir, if somebody did want to take advantage of somebody vulnerable, why would they do it in a way that would get two doctors, a psychologist, a social worker, a nurse, and indeed the state involved? I just do not think it would happen. Thirdly, sir, thank you. Apologies, sir, I don't usually make speeches which are this long. The last thing I would like to talk about, sir, is suffering. And I think it has been mentioned in every single member's speech today. And this is our principal concern. Sir, if we do not approve Route 2 today, people will suffer. People in Jersey will suffer. Why should we enable somebody with terminal cancer to have a dignified end, while, for example, a citizen with multiple sclerosis, we would force them to suffer? Do we have such short memories, sir? I recall the previous debate, which had a similar tone to this debate. It was respectful, it was deeply considered, but we were also informed by the prominent voice of Mr. Dushma, whose husband had passed away. And indeed, I think we should remember him today because it was around 3 years ago that he passed away. He spoke so eloquently of his husband's suffering. And I think that touched on members during the debate, sir, because it felt very real to us. We can feel that we're so removed in this chamber from the people that we represent. And what I would like to do is humanise this debate. So I spoke to a woman yesterday outside the chamber whose husband had died in terrible pain. I could see her own pain on her face. She said there was no medication available that would alleviate his suffering. He had to endure that suffering. And so I feel it's akin to torture. Why would we force anybody to die like that when we have the means to prevent it? Another islander that I have spoken to, unfortunately, has Parkinson's disease in their family and has been diagnosed with it themselves. And their words, their direct words are, as someone with a degenerative disease and having seen my father express that he was glad to get terminal cancer rather than degenerate further with Parkinson's. It is about having the choice. For me, now, I can't imagine using the option, but to know it is in my back pocket if I were to need it is reassuring and supportive. So how can we endorse a situation whereby our laws mean that one of our islanders with a condition like Parkinson's is grateful for a terminal cancer diagnosis? It is quite simply inhumane. I know that it is hard for us to understand what unbearable suffering is like, and we must listen to these stories of others. But also, I think we need to imagine it ourselves, and we have all suffered. Suffering is a universal human experience, and I think we can all recall a time when we have suffered, and I would like members to do so now. As a thought experiment, think back to your worst experience of suffering. And now imagine that suffering is at a level where it is unbearable. It might come and go, and it might be varying levels of physical pain and discomfort. It might be partly alleviated by medication. But we know that not all physical suffering can be. That suffering, I ask members to imagine that suffering is too much for you to endure. It is beyond anything that you can tolerate. So it is hard to imagine because our psychology is such that we find it difficult to imagine such suffering. But it is happening right now to some of our islanders, and we have an opportunity to act for them. So we have a duty to act for them and to alleviate their suffering and to alleviate future suffering. I was moved by Deputy Cole's speech, and I would ask members to do what Deputy Coles has done and to reflect not just on their own suffering, but that potentially of their loved ones. And again, it's hard to do so. But I believe that we are making decisions for our islanders. We must be able to confront what we would do ourselves. So this morning, as many members will have done, I woke up next to somebody who I love very, very much. And as this work often occupies every waking moment, my first thought upon waking was, what would I want for her if she was suffering unbearably at a level she could not tolerate? And if she had capacity to explain to me what she wanted and was pleading with me to help end her suffering. So if members have not gone through these thought processes to test their thinking, as awful, actually as horrifying as these thoughts are, we have a duty to think at this level, because these experiences are actually happening to people on our island, and these are the choices they are facing. But at the moment, there isn't a choice. We are limiting their choices because our legislation does not allow for it. Currently, the people that we share this beautiful island with do not have the option to choose when and how they die if they are unbearably suffering. So, if individuals do not want an assisted death, then they should not have one. They should also not participate in the provision of the service if they don't want to. But nobody should take away my choice or the choice of anybody about their body. This is about my life, my body, my autonomy. It is about the choice of my loved ones. I'm asking members to not force others to suffer unbearably or to watch those they love suffer unbearable pain. I understand there are deeply held beliefs, and the Dean and I think we have more in common than differences, because we both have deeply held beliefs. But legislating for the beliefs of those who are against assisted dying will result in the continuation of suffering, and there is absolute certainty in that. We must listen to what the public want. They want both routes. We need to act with compassion for those in our island who will be suffering in a way they feel they cannot bear. A final point, sir, which has arisen as I have listened to members. One of the points made has been around resources, and members have asked, why are we doing this when we are apparently unable to resource some of our other services for the living? Firstly, the public have given us a very clear direction to do so. But ultimately, sir, it is because people are suffering. When we are weighing up values, and Deputy Gardner mentioned this, we are weighing up the potential of harm that might be caused if we have this legislation in place versus actual real suffering that people are experiencing today. And why should we do it, sir? Because people who are suffering, people who are dying, they matter. I ask members to please hold them in their minds when they make their decision today and support the proposition in full.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the adjournment?
The adjournment, sir.
Members content to adjourn until 2:15? Assembly stands adjourned at 2:15.